Hey guys, tonight we're in Flanders, Western Front, autumn 1917. Somewhere along the Ypres salient where the trench map keeps changing its mind and the mud keeps everything else. You step off the duckboards into a line that smells of wet rope, bully beef tins, and a coin left too long in a pocket. We won't trade in legends, we'll show the small, unheroic bargains that kept British infantry upright when rations missed the road. What do you really eat when the tin stop coming? How does a maquis helmet turn into a frying pan without anyone writing it down? Which rules, heat, hygiene, fair shares, kept sickness out of the bowl, and which rules you broke on purpose? We'll follow your hands, not headquarters, and prove each claim at the fire step instead of in a headline. If you enjoy this kind of misery, tap the buttons and carry on. It keeps the brazier lit. In the comments, tell me where you're watching from, or rate the smell out of 10. Now climb down the step, take the bowl, keep your balance. You won't be comforted here. You'll be handed a job and a knife. It starts with silence you can hear. Rifles sleep in muddy racks, bayonets wrapped in stained cloth. Your greatcoat has turned sullen where it rubs the belt. The cookhouse is a rumour and your stomach keeps time. Hard biscuit is chalk that blunts the tooth. Bully beef islands itself in grease and then vanishes for weeks. You stop counting calories and start counting tins. When the tins don't come, you count shapes that move. The trench wall crawls with little hinge-legged certainty. Whiskers test the plank. Bright eyes read your patience like a posted order. They wear the damp-like uniforms and carry off crumbs with a professional shrug. Someone swears he saw one drag a wax stub. Someone else says he's cooking it later. The rumour earns a weak laugh, then a steadier quiet. Your teeth ache with the wish for heat more than for taste. You tell yourself you're only watching. You tell yourself there will be mail or a wagon or decent soup. The rats do not wait for speeches. By late week you work like a shopkeeper. You know which traverse hosts the bold ones and which dugout keeps crumbs for the shy. You set a scrap of biscuit on a nailhead and settle with a sandbag draped over your knee. A friend coughs into his sleeve the way a match reports a strike. The plank ticks. Whiskers arrive first, then the careful pause. You don't breathe for 3 heartbeats. Your hand closes at the right second and weight answers your palm. Muscle and panic in a grey coat. The trench knife lives under your tunic like an extra rib. It does the plain job. 2 quick pulls and a third for certainty. No ceremony, no story. Just meat you tell yourself not to name. You slip the body in a bread bag that hasn't met bread in days, and you check the corners as if inspecting shelves before closing. Somewhere a shell clears its throat far off. The trench stays small. Your stomach keeps the minutes. Skinning is worse to imagine than to do. You pinch the hide, nick the seam at the hind legs, and peel the coat like damp paper. A pinch of salt, if anyone kept some, turns the hands honest and the grip cleaner. The tail is a rope you don't need. The feet are tiny buttons you cut off and flick into the sump. A mate pretends not to look. Another mutters grace without moving his lips. Someone offers a sliver of onion saved from a parcel, and the smell changes the air like a low hymn. Lice drift where cloth meets skin. You scratch, shrug, and keep working. The blade worries the last threads near the neck. Then the carcass lies plain on a rag that used to be a sock. You tell yourself is no worse than a rabbit from home, except the field is wire and the hedge is sandbag. It is work, not a headline. Work you will eat. The helmet answers because it must. You scour it with sand, spit, and the kind of prayer that doesn't expect an answer. The enamel gave up last month. The steel keeps its patience. 2 inches of fat live in a jam tin that once held plums. Somebody traded a brass button for it and still swears it was fair. You set the helmet over a trench candle punched from wax and cotton, or over a spirit stove if luck remembered your section. When the fat melts, it speaks in small pops, a language you now understand. The meat goes in and tightens, pale, turning to brown while the rim sweats. A sprinkle of salt or flour if found. A wipe of onion across the metal like chalk across slate. Lice tore your cuffs as if invited to dinner. You pinch and crack and go on. Heat answers the day's long question. Smell reaches men you didn't mean to feed. You eat with the speed of a thief. A crust becomes a plate. A sleeve serves as napkin, map, and apology. Salt, if it finds you, lives at the lip of the helmet and you dab it with a careful finger. A mate asks for a bite and you pretend not to hear, then you hear yourself saying yes, and the world does not end. Somewhere along the line, the word rat stops being a dare and turns into supper. Somewhere along the line, the helmet stops being a badge and turns into a pan scratched by teeth. You lean back in the mud and the sky leans closer with its patient grey. For a minute your body believes it is safe. Then the guns remember their story. You lick the rim clean and set the steel down like a plate you're still paying off. No cafeteria line, no queue, only heat then quiet. Morning returns like a clerk who hates you. Stand to before light, rifles checked, bayonets fixed, and eyes on the grey line that holds every rumour. You taste yesterday in your mouth and wipe the bolt with an oily rag that smells of pennies. Lice wake where your collar meets neck. You pinch and roll them with a tired practice snap. Tea is a negotiation. A dented billy, a lump of sugar chipped with a knife, and water that tasted of iron even before the tin canteen learned trench soap. Someone mutters a hymn, someone answers with a cough that sounds older than he is. Dawn does its slow accounting, measuring faces and sandbags. Orders arrive in a voice that never changes. You stand until the light chooses sides, and the sergeant lets the world breathe again. Breakfast asks for proof you still own a spoon. You check the rat traps you laid with biscuit crumbs and string, and you pretend you're only keeping the place tidy, not shopping. Uniform becomes geography you carry. Greatcoat, tunic, shirt, skin. Each layer holds a climate and its own wildlife. Seam soap helps until it doesn't. You dust seams with flea powder that burns like rumours, then watch the lice hold a parade anyway. A mate jokes about earning stripes for extermination and wins a few grim smiles. You chat the seams with a candle, running flame along stitches to pop eggs like bubble wrap, a sound both cheerful and filthy. The air takes the scorched hair smell and saves it for later. Puttees wrap your shins in wet patience. Boots squelch like small swamps with laces. A safety pin keeps your shirt loyal. String replaces buttons that surrendered. You shake your blanket and see the day snow out of it. The trench keeps score in bites and blisters, and you learn to read the map of your own wrists. You hang socks near a candle and watch steam tell the truth. When the corporal isn't looking, you swap a better patch from a dead coat, then say nothing and stitch fast. Your hands move without asking permission. The lice do not pretend anything. They run the post. Food makes time real. Mackinocky stew is a story you tell about last month. Sweet, turnipy and almost honest. Iron rations are a myth until you hear tins open 3 bays over. You trade for crumbs with memories, a pencil stub, a postcard of a peer, a button that still shines. The ration party lugs hope in sacks and returns with sorry arithmetic. You help count like a banker who knows the audit is bad. Bully beef slices shoelace thin. Biscuit soaks in tea until it stops fighting. You drink the liquid and call it soup. Salt is a currency. Onion is the holiday. When nothing arrives, you make a plan that looks a lot like waiting. Then you look for whiskers again. You keep your knife clean and your excuses cleaner. Someone produces a heel of bread and 4 men admire it like a photograph. You hold back a biscuit to bait the traps and hate yourself in a calm, useful way. You decide that memory is not a tool you can use today. Then you put the knife away and sweep crumbs into a pocket. Work goes on because work is the only law that keeps. Sandbags to fill, parapet to face, drains to clear with a stick that used to be a broom. Wiring party after moonset, each stake carried like a promise you might not keep. You crawl out where the ground is stitched and frayed, feeling for gaps while your fingers forget warmth. Wire sings against glove leather in a tune you don't compliment. A flare whispers into bloom, and you fold into shadow until it slows. Then you move again with the patience of a tired cat. You pull a sleeve free, then a knee, then the part of you that does math about distance. Back inside the trench you count them all again and pretend you're finished. A dead flare hangs on the wire like an ornament no one wants to claim. You lift a strand with your bayonet, twist, and feel the barbs argue with leather. The listening post coughs twice. The signal nothing moves but the cold. Back inside, you write the time in a soggy book. Draw a square that means done. It isn't, but the square helps your head sit straight on your neck. Noise has grammar you learn by winter. Whiz-bang is the fast one that arrives while you're still naming it. Mini is the trench mortar that clears her throat first. Incoming means your head fits your shoulders like a cork. Over means you hold still and save the swear for later. Rifle grenades practice optimism and sometimes graduate. You become the kind of person who can sleep under a bombardment if the pattern stays honest. You become the kind who wakes to silence because silence lies. Dawn brings the morning hate and the rifles talk to no one in particular. When it slows, you stretch your jaw, count your fingers, and check your helmet for new dents. It is sensible to inspect cookware after hard weather. You whisper the catalogue to yourself when the guns begin, as if naming saints. The man beside you mutters backblast rules he learned from nobody. A piece of board jumps on the parapet and becomes a hat for one heartbeat. You find that you are counting between shells the way a child counts steps home. When it stops, no one says anything clever. You check your teeth on your tongue and go on. Water rules everything. You keep a full bottle like you keep a secret, tucked, guarded, and heavy with worry. The water cart shows up in its own time and tastes of canvas and promise. A spoon of tea leaves makes it friendly. A cap full of rum makes it brave. Latrines sit catty corner to pride, fly-blown and sprinkled with chloride of lime until your eyes water. A brazier smokes when wood can be stolen from crates. Men thaw their hands above it like beggars warming coins. You learn to drink before sleep and to stop before patrol. You learn that thirst negotiates harder than hunger. You mark good drips in dugout roofs and set tins to catch the night. At night the barrel lid knocks in wind like a weak salute. Down in the sump a rat drinks without asking. You listen to the trickle and count seconds between drips, because counting something you can hear is better than counting things you can't. You promise your throat there will be more in the morning, then let the promise stand on its own feet. You become the trench's butcher because you keep your hands steady when everyone else trembles. Not brave, steady. Your knife stays sharp because you stole time to hone it, and because sharp knives make Leicesters of a mess. Men drift by your dugout flap like customers who forgot their wallets. They bring biscuit bribes, a square of chocolate wrapped in paper too clean for here, half an onion like a promise. You take the sacks they pass and don't ask where they were filled. A quick press behind the head, a neat cut at the throat, and the twitch fades like a match going out. You drop bodies onto a clean rag that used to be a sleeve. The hide parts if you tease the seam with the back of the blade. The skin peels in one steady pull when your thumbs find the right line. Feet off, tail off, gut drawn, bad bits binned into the sump. You work without flourish. When the brazier wakes, you pass the meat across and men glance down, nod once and go. No speeches, just supper that doesn't ask questions. Word spreads you can make meat behave. A corporal offers a square of tobacco for a lesson. A private trades a candle. Someone promises to mind sentry if you'll show him the cuts. You hold the little carcass the way a tailor holds cloth, seeing seams instead of animal. Hind legs first, then the back straps. Thin but honest. Rib meat scraped into a mince that fries quick and stings the nose. You teach the trick of cracking the skull to free the tongue, rich as any payday here. You warn them off the liver's slick shine and the gall's mean burst. No one needs that taste again. Rinse with a splash of tea if you have it. Flour the pieces in a tobacco tin if you're lucky. Salt is a decision you make for the section, a pinch shared on the blade tip. A helmet earns its keep when it sizzles. A bayonet serves as spatula when the rim gets hot. When the pieces brown, you lift them to a crust of bread or to fingers that don't mind heat anymore, and the steam smells almost like home. Letters arrive damp, smelling of a house that no longer fits your shoulders. Someone writes about the village show where rabbits won ribbons and pies behaved like Sunday, and you fold the paper along your thigh so the words stop talking. Home says the parish is collecting socks and something called a ration book. You consider sending back your helmet for the irony and let the joke die. Your bunk neighbour reads a line about grocer's butter and loses his place because someone coughed. He tucks the letter in his cap and pretends the butter will wait. A photo rides in with a lighter's weight, a girl squinting into weather you almost remember. You look at her once and then at your hands, which belong to a man who fetches heat from mud. The envelope goes under your shirt where sweat makes the ink honest. That evening you cut 3 rats and do the neat work as if the paper were watching. You fry in 2 turns so there is a bite for him too. He mumbles thanks, then reads the same sentence again, and for 1 minute the trench sounds like cutlery and not war. Bathing is a rumour with legs. You strip to the waist by a pump that wheezes like an old uncle and scrub with sand, soap shavings, and a rag that used to be respectful. You lift your shirt and lay it over a mess tin. Eggs pop in tidy rows as a mate passes the candle under the cloth. The scent is burnt chicken without the chicken. You scratch your scalp with the back of your knife and watch grey snow fall from the edge like dandruff with ambition. A medical orderly eyes your red patches, writes something in a book and rations you a dab of ointment that smells of camphor and old drawers. He tells you to keep clean while standing in a puddle that argues with boots. You nod like a good patient, then chat the seams again for luck. Steam makes ghosts above the brazier and the ghosts wear your cap. You put your shirt back on while it is warm enough to be kind. By lights out, the itching returns with the trumpet, but for an hour your skin remembers water, and you forgive the day for most of its sins. Night eats sound until all you hear are small teeth. The rats claim the duckboards, making routes like trams with better schedules. You set tins as bells along the trench wall, strings to pegs. A tug rings a warning that meat is inspecting the shop. A mate from the next bay swears he saw one as big as a cat. You tell him cats are myths like warm beds. On listening post, you lie with your chin in slime and count the scurry between flares, ears sorting rat from boot from a patrol that doesn't belong to you. A flutter means bird, a patter means dinner, a pause means trouble. You tap the stock twice for the code and hear the answer crawl back along the wire. Far out, a shape pauses by a shell hole and then slides away. Nearer, whiskers test your sleeve, bold as quartermasters. When the flare sinks, you back out inch by inch, tasting peaty rot and cordite, and decide the night is a shop you cannot close, only keep tidy. Once a new officer tries to stop it. He says there will be charges. He says King's regulations do not mention helmets as frying pans. You stand while he speaks because standing is cheaper than arguing. The sergeant answers with a face that has already dug 3 trenches this week. He points at the ration board and the timetable that never keeps promises. He points at the brazier and at the faces behind it. The officer's voice lowers as if someone turned down a lamp. He says he won't see it. He walks away and looks very hard at the sky. That night you cut, skin and fry with the helmet tilted level by a spent cartridge. The sergeant takes a small portion, chews and nods once to the dark. In the morning the officer inspects rifles, skips the brazier and asks about ammunition. Everyone says the word plenty and no one says the word meat. You go back to work and the trench goes back to pretending rules are real when they help and quiet when they don't. You slip into a role no one advertises. Men drift by with bread bags that clink, a shy grin behind whiskers, and questions they don't put into sentences. You become price, scale, butcher, and cook without a counter. The sergeant never says yes, never says no. He walks past like a man who doesn't notice a black market that also feeds him. You keep a small book in your head. Who shared last time, who traded a candle, who kept quiet when you needed quiet. You cut with the same neat economy every time, slipping the blade where seam meets skin, making quick piles that look like work instead of hunger. Shares go by memory and a glance, not by weight, because a scale would start arguments you can't afford. A heel of bread buys the rib strips, a pinch of salt earns the tender back, an onion ring pays for the extra minute at the fire. When you hand over a portion, men thank the heat, not you. That suits you. Your hands stay busy and the trench keeps its face. Nobody writes a receipt, everybody remembers. The queue keeps moving because you do. The helmet turns into a stove by degrees. You seat it on 2 bricks and wedge a stone under the rim so the pool sits level. Fat goes in, a spoon from a friend's tin, a dab of grease from a rag, once a miraculous knob that smelled like bacon and made men blink. You feed a trench candle through a drilled hole in a jam tin, shielded with scrap so light doesn't travel. When the steel warms, you listen. A soft tick means patience. A spit means heat enough. You warn new hands about the paint, scrape it now, or it will season your supper with something you can't name. You turn the meat with a bayonet tip because no one kept a spatula, and you keep the rim wiped with bread so nothing burns twice. The strap stays off and dry. Leather hates heat more than you do. Steam writes a quiet letter in the cold. You read it and add another minute. Every rule you keep was bought with a bad day. Glands stay out. Offal goes deep under a board where rain won't return it. You boil the knife when you can and wipe it with a cloth that remembers soap. If meat smells wrong, you don't argue. You feed the sump and swear you'll make it back tomorrow. A medical orderly mentions fevers that ride vermin, a sickness that begins like a long shift and ends like a bad telegram. He says heat is your only shield. You cook until the hiss runs out and the edges crisp, until the colour says yes, even to a fussy uncle. You don't lick fingers until the flame is dead. You don't touch your eyes with trench hands, no matter how they itch. You learn to watch for the ones that move too slow or too bold, the kind that read like trouble. Those you leave for the mud and the crows. You keep your own counsel and your mates keep theirs. No one says brave. No one says shame. You say done. Now and then the line next door leans over. A poilu trades a clove of garlic from a pocket that smells of cheese and wool. You give tea and a bit of soap that hasn't made friends yet. He shows you how his mother sears rabbit. Salt early, garlic at the pan's edge, bread to chase the fat, then shrugs and calls the rat by another name so the trick travels faster. For a minute the trench smells like a door you could open. Someone pours a finger of rough wine into the lid and the sizzle sharpens. Heads turn without permission. He tears bread with his hands and laughs at your helmet until he tastes the crust. Then he nods and eats the second piece slower. Across the wire, a flare lifts and falls like a tired star. You pass him the brown strip that hugged the rim and hand him a crisp end. He taps 2 fingers to the helmet's brim and bows like you saved a church. You grin and pretend you didn't hear that word. Shells interrupt lessons without apology. A whistle, the quick lift in the gut, then the world slaps the parapet and showers you with other people's timber. You grab the helmet by the brim and squat into the angle where 2 walls meet. Fat leaps and kisses your wrist. You don't yelp because you need breath for later. The brazier clatters, spills cinders, and you kick a board over it so sparks don't write your address in the night. Men fold themselves around dug-out mouths, counting heartbeats with their teeth. Whiz, bang, pause, whiz, bang, longer pause. You lift the board, blow once, and watch the coals glow like old eyes. 2 pieces land face down in water that was pretending to be a floor. You fish them out, scrape the mud, and put them back with the steady insult of a man who refuses to lose twice. When the barrage walks off to bother another street, you set the helmet level again and finish the job. No one cracks a joke until the first bite vanishes. Then someone swears the mud improved it. You let him live. Letters home behave themselves. You write about boots that drink water and a sky that can't make up its mind. You say the stew is hearty when the tins arrive and you let the sentence stand alone for dignity. You describe a lark that sang over the wire. Too bold or too dumb to know about men. You thank your mother for the socks and thank your sister for the postcard of a peer, and you don't mention frying pans shaped like helmets. You promise you're eating, which is true, and that you're keeping warm, which is sometimes true, and that you're in good spirits, which is true when the pan is talking. You close by asking for cocoa, onions, and any old fat the grocer can be shamed into parcelling. Then you fold the paper along your thigh and lick the flap like a gentleman. The envelope rides under your shirt where ink believes in weather. Later, by the brazier, you read it back to yourself and decide the lies are small and the truths are big enough to be breakfast. You close your eyes. You let them live this once. Feet decide how your day goes. You pull boots that weigh like small anchors and massage grease into your soles until the skin shines like a polished apple. Whale oil when the quartermaster remembers, axle grease when he doesn't. Socks rotate like sentries, one on, one drying, one waiting its turn near the brazier where sparks try to autograph everything. You strip your puttees and feel the air argue with damp skin. The corporal inspects toes with the gravity of a judge and says the word trenchfoot the way men say winter. You press a thumb into pale flesh and watch blood return as if late to work. Powder helps until it doesn't. A mate swears by rum on a rag, another swears at everything. You tuck dry paper under your heels, a trick that makes sense to people who live in mud. Somewhere a rat tests a sleeping man's sock and decides leather is simpler. You polish the heel plates with a rag, lace tight, and tell your feet you'll listen tomorrow. They vote today. Dugouts breathe like old dogs. Timber props sag, sandbags sweat, and a candle turns the walls the colour of tea. You thread a needle with twine and reattach a button to a shirt that left pride behind. Cards whisper on a crate and someone hums a hymn under his breath so the tune won't get ideas. You boil water in a mess tin until it thinks about honesty, then dunk a shaving of tea and pretend the colour is flavour. Lice parade from blanket edges when the candle moves. You chat seams again, pinching, popping, and letting the little snaps mark time. The floor keeps a puddle that never learns. A gas alert rattle hangs on a nail above the door like a guilty conscience, and everyone pretends not to look at it. Your kit sits in its corner, straps coiled, bayonet oiled to a sensible shine. You sharpen the knife that does 2 jobs now and think about onions. You always think about onions. They drill you on masks until your hands can find them asleep. The rubber smells like hot socks and fear. The eyepieces bloom with breath and then clear in slow patience. You practice the sweep and seat, chin set, strap pulled, then the breath through a box that tastes of damp charcoal. A corporal times you with a watch that still believes in appointments. He says gas is polite until it isn't. He says speed is manners. You learn the rattle's voice and the bells, and you learn how sound slips oddly when fabric holds your face. Cooking waits until the drills stop because nobody wants garlic in a filter. When you finally lift the mask, the trench smells like a wet animal again and the world widens by 2 inches. You stow it ready, hood rolled, mouthpiece checked, and test the strap one more time. Habit is the only thing that shows up when shells don't. Fuel is a scavenger's prayer. You knock nails from crate slats and split the wood with a trench knife that prefers meat. Duckboards donate splinters if you ask badly. Braziers rise from pierced petrol tins, their sides pocked with holes hammered by tent pegs and boredom. You twist wicks from torn shirts and dip them in fat saved from imaginary bacon. The trench candle takes light like a gentleman and gives it back like a debtor. Steady enough to fry, fickle enough to burn fingers. You keep a scrap lid to snuff it quick when flares climb because light walks faster than you do. Once a sapper gifts you a length of wire, and you bend it into a stand that fits the helmet's curve. It steadies the pan and makes you feel like a craftsman again. Later, someone carves patterns into a shell base, polishing until the brass forgets it killed anyone. Men like useful beauty. It helps the smoke behave. Rat hunts turn into sport when the mail is late. Clubs whack like metronomes against duckboards. Bayonet points flash where the boards break and a terrier borrowed from a neighbouring unit trembles with religion. You work with a sack and a quick wrist, feeding the bag with a rhythm that feels like stacking chores. A prize goes to whoever lands the biggest, though nobody weighs anything official. The sergeant frowns, then bets a cigarette on the dog anyway. When the shouting quiets, you sort the catch with the same rules as always. Sleek coats, bright eyes, good weight. No sores, no wobble, no bad smell. The rest go to the sump where water minds its indifferent business. You skin by rote while jokes run short. Meat piles into careful 10s and 12s. Shares counted out on a folded ground sheet. No one eats before heat has its say. When the helmet answers, the terrier chews a rib like a king and the men clap once for him. You keep the knife moving. Payday and rum day try to be friends. Coins arrive sticky with old pocket and the ledger gives you a number that feels like somebody else's. The rum ration marches down the trench in measured cups, fire that thinks it's medicine. You warm your hands over the brazier and decide to fry a little extra for the sentry team stepping out later. A padre appears with boots too clean for here and a voice like bread. He asks after soles and toes and whether anyone wants to write home. You hand him a strip-on crust. He hesitates, then eats like a man who believes in grace by other names. He thanks you without looking at the helmet too long. When the cups return empty, men speak softer and think about sleep without saying the word. You bank the coals and tilt the helmet to drain, setting it in its corner like a night shield that decided to cook supper. Outside, stars try to keep watch. Inside, you make a list for tomorrow and forget to finish it. The ration party returns at last, thin as a rumour, shoulders bent under sacks that sound like disappointment. 2 tins of something, 3 loaves that are mostly memory, and onions sadly introducing themselves. You spread a ground sheet near the brazier and portion things by habit. Stew in the mess tin first, rat meat after, because the salt in the tin forgives sins you cannot. The helmet warms, the fat wakes, and the stew changes colour at the edges where the meat kisses heat. Men drift closer without deciding to, bowls held like polite questions. You stir slow so nothing sticks, scraping the rim with a bayonet. A mate breaks biscuit into the tin to thicken. Another shakes a last hopeful rattle of pepper from a folded scrap. You ladle small to start, then walk the line again, topping the ones on duty, saving the last for the man who hates onions. By the end, the stew has apologised for itself and the helmet smells useful again. Someone names the mixture staff tea and earns 2 groans and a grin. You wipe the ladle and set the next pan to warm because appetites are the only clocks that keep time here. The helmet earns a maintenance parade of its own. You scour the bowl with sand and a twist of rag until the steel lifts a dull, respectable shine. Paint flaked off months ago. The black enamel left in corners blisters whenever the fire gets bold, so you keep those corners honest with a knife tip. Lice love the chin strap's seams, so the strap sleeps elsewhere, looped around a peg like a snake you're not feeding. You boil water whenever you can, tip it through the bowl, and watch the small white husks spin like bad confetti. After, you dry the steel over coals, turning it slowly so the heat chases damp without scalding your fingers. Sometimes the helmet becomes a wash basin for socks, sometimes a lid over dough that wishes it were bread, and sometimes, often, a pan that knows meat. You tell yourself the boil makes it clean enough and let the sentence stand. The strap goes back on only when the brazier sleeps. The lice return anyway, punctual as pay parade, and you scratch, then laugh at yourself, then scratch again. Your job grows rules the way damp grows mould. No favourites. No second helpings until the last man's first is gone. Sick men first if they can swallow. Sentry men next because the night owns them. Trades stay clean and quick. Onion for a ladle, tobacco for a crisp strip. A spoon of rum for the browned scrap nobody admits to wanting most. You keep your ledger in the back of your head and spend it on quiet when a patrol needs it. The sergeant lets you run it because he can see order standing where trouble might. Once, a private tries to push forward with a grin too wide for his face. You look at him until he counts the queue again and steps back to the proper place. You keep back a small portion for the burial party without telling anyone, and no one asks why the pot always lasts 1 ladle longer than maths suggest. Fairness makes food taste better. Men tell you that with their shoulders when their mouths are busy. Gas comes like a clerk with the bad news. Flat, official, and early to the meeting. The rattle claws the air. You drop the ladle and seat the mask, straps remembering their job before you remember yours. The world narrows to 2 circles and a rubber smell that wants to be your whole life. You cap the brazier with a bit of tin and watch flames waver like a bad hand. The cloud licks the parapet and sulks along the trench. Dull green if the light catches it, colourless otherwise. You stand on the fire step and breathe through the box while eyes sting and time stretches. Somewhere down the line a man coughs in the wrong rhythm and another voice steadies him by counting. At last the gong says clear, then says it again. You break the seal, blink, and the world widens by an inch. The stew survived. You stir once, taste, and add a little more salt. Cuisine à la respirator stays off the letter home. Home sends a rabbit pie recipe you could recite to a judge. You improvise a crust with biscuits smashed to gravel, fat rubbed in with fingertips, and a splash of tea for courage. The mess tin becomes a pie dish. The helmet sears the meat first so it will not weep too much later. Onion, 1 clove of French charity garlic, and a pinch of dried something that might be thyme or simple optimism. You press the paste along the tin sides, patch holes with crumbs, and pour the filling like treasure in a small bank. The lid goes on as a patchwork blanket. You set the tin on 2 nails above the brazier and rotate it by the minute hand in your head. When the top turns the colour of a proper story, you ease it off with a knife and let it breathe. It cracks when you cut, but the steam is honest and the taste remembers Sundays from a long way off. You split it 3 ways. You, the lad on sentry next, and the man who hasn't kept anything down for 2 days. Call it pie and keep a straight face. Night patrol borrows you for steadiness, not for speed. The wire remembers your name from last week and tries to keep it. Your hands lift strands and lay them down without singing. Your knees find holes that weren't there before. Out in a shell hole, a man breathes quick pennies and slow mud. You bandage the leg above the tear with a strip from a shirt that once fit. Grease from the helmet rim waterproofs the cloth, and the wounded man hisses but nods, grateful for anything that stays where it should. You and another drag him by the shoulders, counting steps to keep hands honest. Back inside, you heat water, wash what can be washed, and set the brazier to low patience. A thin stew of rat and onion follows because a body that bled deserves heat. By the time the stretcher party takes him, the stars have turned their shoulders, and the trench feels briefly like a town without streets. You bank the coals and sit on your heels until your breath finds you again. By now the rats know your timetable, and you learn theirs. They patrol the duckboards at last light, bold on the angle where 2 bays meet, and they return after stand 2 when men loosen straps. You set spring traps from scrap wire and a hinge, baited with biscuit that already taught humility. A sack hangs from a peg, ready for the quick drop and quicker cut. You keep a skinning cloth you boil when you can, then dry over the brazier until it smells of pennies. The knife sits under your tunic, oiled thin. The stone waits in a sock because grit is cheaper than luck. A big grey noses the bait. The wire snaps. The sack darkens with a shape that fights less each second. You work without looking around. Hide off, feet off, tail gone, gut to the sump that swallows everything but noise. Lice parade along the chin strap to bless the ceremony. You pinch 3 with a quick flick. Meat to the bowl, skin to a nail to dry, bone to a pile that means stock if tomorrow keeps its promises. You wash with sand and tea and tell yourself you've done worse. You haven't. Only this. Longer. Sleep is a truce, not peace. You stuff a sandbag for a pillow and find the angle where your spine stops lecturing. Boots stay on unless the sergeant says different. Laces loosen just enough to let blood make its rounds. Your spoon rides in your pocket because a spoon is wealth and theft is fast. A mate snores like a saw. Another murmurs an address he hasn't posted in months. Above, water finds seams and dots your blanket with constellations no one has named. Rats cross your chest like scouts, pause to test your sleeve, then move on when you don't twitch. You learn to breathe shallow so steam won't betray you. You learn to wake on a footstep and sleep through a barrage if the beat stays honest. Every hour someone nudges the brazier and the ember sighs. You roll, hug your greatcoat close, and hide your fingers in the warm cave between knees and cloth. The helmet sits upside down to dry, rim beaded, strap unbuckled, interior crawling with tiny optimism. You watch one louse climb the liner like a mountaineer, then squeeze it into history and let the trench keep time with drips. News travels in mud-stained corners. A trench paper floats along the line. jokes stapled to grief with brass tacks. Someone reads aloud a poem about bully beef and the way it dreams of gravy. Someone else answers with a limerick that earns an honest groan. A Frenchman passes the word civet as if it washed dishes by itself. You nod, sear the meat, and accept the compliment with onion. A drummer boy, older than the drum, barters a cigarette for 2 browned ends, eats slow, and declares you a chef as if the word belongs here. You write a recipe on the inside of a ration label. Fry hot, salt late, bread for the rim. It circulates in pockets until the rain edits the instructions back into pulp. Later you trade a crisp strip for a pencil stub and copy the rules again, adding the warning about paint and the note about liver. The sergeant finds the paper and says nothing, but his mouth twitches at the line about garlic. Across the wire, somebody sings half a tune that used to be a love song. You stir the helmet and let the steam be your applause. No Michelin inspectors. A raid leaves you counting heads and checking knives. You aren't on the team tonight. You draw stretcher and broth. The moon keeps bad secrets and the wire shines like teeth. Hours stretch while you watch the parapet for the shadow that means friend. When figures finally slip back, you take a wrist, then a shoulder, and pull a man down into the trench mouth where names work again. Blood slicks his sleeve. You knot a bandage and grease the tying point with a wipe of fat so the wet won't undo what fingers did. He shakes, laughs once without humour, and asks if the stew survived. It did. You set the helmet low on coals and tilt it true with a cartridge. The sizzle steadies the air. Steam clears his face better than pity. The runner brings another, limping eyes bright with too much sky. You park him by the brazier, wedge a board against wind and serve in careful mouthfuls. When the last bowl empties, the trench remembers to breathe. You bank the coals and write 2 names on your cuff. Arguments bloom and wither about what you cook. One man calls it survival and wipes the rim with bread. Another calls it a sin and turns away until hunger changes his vote. You keep your counsel and your knife. You show them the simple hygiene that keeps a section on its feet. Guts out fast, bile kept whole, hands rinsed in tea if nothing better appears. Onion masks what it can, heat answers the rest. The strap stays off because lice love speeches. They hold rallies at your chin often enough. When a fatback scrap appears from someone's parcel, you melt it slow and strain the cracklings through gauze stolen from a dressing. Grease lives in a jar like a small bank. Pepper, when it happens, gets hidden and measured like confession. You hand a strip to the skeptic and watch him hesitate, then chew, then fold in silence. No one says conversion. No one needs to. You clean the helmet with sand, rinse with boiling water, and lift it to the peg where it dries and crawls. A louse falls, tries again, falls again. You make a note to boil the strap twice tomorrow. On rest day, so named by comedians, you march a mile to the baths and delousing. Big tubs steam under corrugated roofs. A sergeant major runs the place like a choir with soap for hymns. You strip and drop your kit into a wire basket that disappears into a chamber where paraffin heat bakes every seam loud. The lice die noisily, or maybe you only hope they do. You stand in line, bare as newborns and twice as bashful, waiting for a turn under a hose that pretends to be a river. It scalds where mud once argued and leaves skin pink as new brick. A cook from another unit sneaks you a tin lid of dripping. You nod thanks and promise him onion when the parcel comes. Back at the trench, you reclaim your kit, now smoking like a sermon, and pull on a shirt that crackles with false innocence. You set the helmet on 2 bricks, melt the gift, and pour the clean fat into your jar. Evening finds you frying thin, hot and quick for the squad that drew night wiring. They eat standing. You enjoy the silence that follows, because silence is the only compliment anyone risks. Snipers teach the trench new manners. You move with your chin down and your cap at an angle that turns your eyes into shadows. Periscopes rise like reeds, lenses fog, and you wipe them with a sleeve that lives hard. A notch in the parapet becomes a window you visit in quick, stingy glances, never in a rhythm a stranger could learn. Someone ties a bit of mirror to a stick and tilts light along the traverse to tempt a shot. a crack answers, wood spits, and the lesson writes itself. Keep your helmet off the skyline unless it is upside down over coals. You relay messages in low voices and hand signs because sound climbs ladders faster than you can. When you must look, you use the periscope and count 1, 2, drop, because the man across the waist also counts. Even the brazier gets a screen, tin tacked to trestles, so glow won't tell stories to glass. You feel watched by noon and proved right by dusk. Rats don't mind snipers. They cross like they own the lane. You take the hint and move like a rat. Quick, direct, uninteresting, all business from board to board. On rotation, you march back to billets that were barns before the war, taught them new words. An estaminet leans around the square with shutters that remember paint. The woman behind the bar counts coins with a patience that outlived 3 flags and fries anything that will sit still. Eggs if you have notes, potatoes if you don't. You hold a ticket like a passport and trade it for a plate that smokes like a small miracle. Grease crawls down your wrist in friendly lines. Men go quiet over chips and pretend the forks are silver. Someone plays a piano that has forgotten most of its teeth. Someone else raises a glass to nobody. You pass your helmet to the kitchen, and she laughs once, then sets it on her hob as if every pan deserves work. It sizzles honest as ever. For an hour you're a customer and not a ledger. You pocket a paper twist of salt and tuck a clove of garlic into your sock for later. On the road back, boots remember stones, and you rehearse the next supper in your head. When the wire shows again, appetite folds its napkin and gets back to duty. Burial detail feels older than you are. You follow a stretcher into a communication trench that wanders, then lift in slow rhythm through ground that will not hold still. The chaplain speaks in a voice made for rooms. Here it rides wind and lands where it can. You set a cross of crate wood at the head and carve a number you swear you will never forget. A mate pockets the small book of a man who loved lists and promises to send it home. You kneel to press the soil down. 2 pats that say stay, please. Back in the bay you heat water, shave slivers of onion into it, and lay in meat cut thin enough to cook before grief remembers you. The helmet sweats and answers, and bowls pass hand to hand with thanks a little slower than usual. Steam fogs your eyes and no one mentions it. When the last spoon scrapes, you tip the scraps to the terrier and clean the rim with bread. You wash the knife twice and dry it on your sleeve, then hang it by its thong. Names sit on your cuff in pencil. You don't rub them yet. Delousing returns like tax season. You strip to the waist and chat seams over a candle until eggs pop like rude punctuation. The sergeant loans a drum that used to cradle paraffin. Now it bakes shirts into surrender. A sapper rigged a chimney and a grate, and he tends it like a blacksmith with a temper. Blankets go in, steam comes out, and the smell is part barber, part chicken, part burnt alphabet. You oil your knife and slide the edge along the stone while you wait, counting breaths until the hiss changes tune. When the basket comes back, cloth crackles and lice lie still in their pride. You knock the cuffs of your sleeves and watch pale dust fall, then pull on the shirt while it still carries heat enough to pass for kindness. Your chin strap gets a boil of its own in the mess tin. 2 full minutes by a pocket watch that outlived a tailor. After, you sit on the fire step and scratch only out of habit, then laugh, then stop. Somewhere down the line a man sings 3 notes of something and forgets the rest. You let the quiet keep it. You save skins because waste feels like an insult. Stretched on pegs under the duckboard lip, they dry into thin leather that smells of pennies and rain. A French cobbler from the next sector teaches you to cut them into thumb guards for wirework and patches for mitts. Ugly, yes, but honest, and better than bare cloth when frost pushes into your fingers. Bones stock the pot when water allows, a pale broth that learns onion and a pinch of tea leaves to behave like soup. You keep a small roll of twine for trussing and a strip of muslin for straining, washed when possible, boiled when not. The fat jar grows by spoons and careful wishes. You scrawl a recipe on the inside of a ration label, sear first, salt late, bread for the rim, and pin it under a nail where steam can't eat it. The terrier sleeps at your boot, snout on paws, dreaming in kicks and sighs. You turn the skins once, listen to the brazier talk like quiet rain, and decide the job is a kind of thrift that might even qualify as virtue. A recruit arrives with winter still on his cheeks. He stares at the helmet the way new men stare at anything that breaks the picture they packed from home. You hand him the knife and a small carcass and talk him through the seam, thumbs finding the easy road between skin and meat, cuts small and patient. He swallows twice, then manages it, and the pride that lands on his face looks like weather finally choosing a season. You flour the pieces in a tobacco tin, set them in when the fat sings, and show him how the edges brown first. Onion waits at the rim like a tutor. When steam rises, you stand together, hands over heat, listening for the change in the pan's voice that always means done. You portion his share a touch larger and pretend not to notice his thanks. He eats fast, then slower. After, he wipes the rim with bread and washes the knife while you dry the bowl. He asks what to call the dish. You tell him supper, and he nods as if the word can hold. Rain returns like small change poured from a tall pocket. It pings on corrugated sheet, slides down dugout steps, and turns the communication trench into a canal with poor manners. You work the drain with a stick, teasing silt from the mouth so the flow remembers which way is downhill. The duckboard floats and bumps your shin like a bored fish. You set it square and weight it with a sandbag that leaks honesty and grey tears. The brazier sulks. Damp wood argues and wins. You feed it shavings, then a rag twisted into a wick, then a sliver of candle coaxed to behave. Heat finally answers in a thin blue tongue, and you set the helmet low to warm the steel, not scorch it. Tea goes first to wake the pan, then a spoon of fat to quiet the scrape. When the rain lightens, you lift the lid of sky, taste the air, and decide supper can keep its appointment after all. A field kitchen appears like a travelling rumour and asks for hands. You shoulder crates, pass kettles, and feel your spine remember work other than hiding. The cook, a monarch in a greasy cap, guards his tinned beef like a banker and swats flies with a ladle that could settle arguments. He sees your helmet, laughs once, and grants a corner of the range where space isn't rented. You sear your share there, skimming fat into your jar while no one minds. He salts the mash and tells a story about a hotel he worked before the world took up shovels, a place where eggs lined up like soldiers and butter never broke rank. You nod, hand him an onion ring, and borrow pepper with a look. He tastes your pan, raises a brow, and tips you a scrap of dripping in payment. It slides into your jar like a coin in a church box. You march the pot back down the zigzag and the trench lifts its head. Mail brings a parcel that smells of coal cellar and lavender. Inside, 2 onions wrapped like eggs, a stripe of bacon shy as contraband, and a letter full of weather and gossip. You read about Mrs. Penfold's cat and the allotment beans and recognise every fence post by name. You fold the page and tuck it under your shirt so the words can think in the dark. The bacon earns a tiny ceremony. You dice, you render, you share the crisp with the squad like it's church. Fat goes to the jar earns a new scratch to mark the gift. Onion browns in the helmet and the smell steps over the parapet with both boots. A man from 2 bays down arrives with a loaf he swears is fresh. You saw it march here like the rest of you. You slice careful, rub the heel around the rim to catch every secret and lay the meat on top. For once, silence is not worry. It is gratitude with busy teeth. A rat bites a man who fell asleep with his hand outside his blanket. He wakes with a shout that climbs the traverse and earns 3 curses. The wound is small and ugly, 2 neat holes like punctuation with a temper. You wash it with boiled water, scold him for feeding wildlife, and dab iodine while he teaches the trench new phrasing. The medical orderly arrives, checks for fever, and writes observe in a book that has outlived 3 companies. You set a trap under the pallet and dust it with flour to show footprints. By stand to, the flour prints a full confession. You take the culprit quiet, quick, and practical, then cook it slower than anger. The bitten man gets the first strip on bread, and the world relaxes an inch. You boil the knife, boil the helmet, and boil the strap for good measure. When the orderly returns, you point at the clean kit. He nods once and moves on. Rumours of rotation crawl through like mice that learn discretion. Some say a week, some say days, one says tomorrow with the confidence of a man who can't read calendars. You inventory your kit in your head, then for real, socks that behave, a shirt that might, 2 candles, a pencil stub, the stone, the knife, the jar, the letter. The helmet goes last into the sack with its rim wrapped in a rag so it won't shout at corners. You mend a tear in your ground sheet and patch a mitten with rat skin cut thin. The terrier watches, yawns and thumps his tail against a crate that used to hold peaches. You count your matches and write a list on your cuff you will sweat away by dusk. The sergeant says nothing direct, just checks the trench as if handover were a kind of prayer. You fry a last pan before dark and split it 5 ways because hope eats too. Night brings are quiet so heavy you keep checking if you went deaf. No star shells, no probing bursts, only a wind that tugs the wire like a bored child. You sit the listening post with your cheek in a scarf and your eyes making little half circles, left to right, right to left, like a watchman in a story that pays him poorly. Mud holds you by the knees with slow affection. Somewhere a fox yips, and the sound bounces off the parapet, strange as piano in a shed. Close by, a rat tests your boot, decides against it, and walks the duckboard like a landlord. You hear water counting itself in a broken tin and wonder how many drips make dawn. When the relief taps your shoulder, you back away an inch at a time, taste the cold and feel the trench accept you again. The brazier is a red eye under a board. You lift it, breathe once and add a stick. Rotation arrives before dawn like a door finally opening the right way. You pack in the order your hands remember. Knife wrapped in cloth, stone in the sock heel, fat jar padded, letter under your shirt where it rides like a second heart. The helmet nests upside down in the sack, rim cushioned so it won't argue with nails on the lorry. You shoulder the kit and fall into a file that smells of wet canvas and relief. The trench gives you a last nudge at the ankle and you climb the ladder patient as a man leaving a bad tenancy. The road widens, mud thins and ruts become honest stones. A village roofline shows like teeth. Shutters blink awake. A woman sweeps her step and pauses to inspect your strange pan. You nod without ceremony. The lorry growls and you ride with your chin tucked, counting barns and hedges, pretending the engine is a steady kettle. When you pile out at billets, the air holds bread, horses and a rumour that today might keep its promises. You set the sack down and breathe like a man just handed back his name. Rest billets have rules the trench never learned. A barn turns straw into ranks, a pump becomes a sergeant, a cookhouse window is a court where potatoes argue their case. You claim a corner and hang the helmet high so mice will think twice. A corporal posts chores and you volunteer for the ones that touch the range. Wood to split, water to carry, ash to bury where wind keeps its opinions. The company cook eyes your jar with professional politeness and asks how you keep the cracklings crisp. You tell him the truth about low heat and patience. He grants you a square of flour, rare as forgiveness, and you trade an onion and a smile. You knead with fat and tea because milk is a fable here, then tuck the dough under a blanket near the stove while it learns to rise. Outside, wheels clatter and a cart argues with cobbles. You oil the knife, sweep the hearth, and chalk a quiet ledger on a crate lid. Who helped? Who gets the first slice? Who kept watch while the pot thought? You become a baker by accident. The helmet, greased thin, takes dough like a patient aunt. The edge is brown while the middle finds its courage. You turn the loaf with a plate and a prayer to leverage, then slide it back to finish while the range breathes evenly. Men gather with bowls and hopeful sarcasm. You knock the crust with a knuckle. The sound rings hollow, then full. The music every kitchen trusts. When you tip it out, the loaf slumps, blushes and survives. You cut fair slices with a bayonet wiped clean, lay them on lids, and paint each with dripping that smells like memory. Salt rides a fingertip. Steam fogs your eyes. Someone mutters grace without announcing it. You save the heel for the man who stood the last watch, and the crumb for the dog that earned a nap. For an hour, The ward takes a chair in the corner and keeps quiet like a relative who knows when to behave. Training returns as if it never left. Bayonet drill until lungs knock. Bomb practice into a chalk pit that coughs dust. A lecture on fuses from an officer who looks younger off the parapet. You carry a mate in a fireman's lift while he critiques your route with cruel affection. After, you wash at a trough that remembers horses, scrubbing the strap and liner until the water scalds your knuckles. You boil the knife, oil its temper, and rub the helmet with sand until it shows a dull, honest shine. The medical orderly inspects feet and talks trench fever like a tax. You listen and promise your toes you'll keep them. Evening finds you at the range again, coaxing a stew from rat, onion, and the last spoon of flour. You rotate sentries by the ladle and taste only after they taste first. Discipline makes food sweeter than it has any right to be. The estaminet learns your name for a day. You bring onions and a clean jar. She brings eggs and a pan that doesn't wobble. You agree on terms without paperwork. She fries the eggs while you sizzle bread soldiers in the helmet, turning them until they stand to attention. A child in wooden shoes points at the upside-down crown over flame and laughs, which feels like medicine you can trust. She writes "sold at Pain Grill" on a chalkboard in a hand that once wrote wedding announcements. Men eat with hats off and voices low. You scrape the steel clean and pour the gold into your jar, screw the lid and tie it twice. She tucks a twist of salt into your pocket and refuses your coin with a shrug. For a heartbeat you remember cafes with porcelain cups and decide table service beats self-checkout. Outside, a cart creaks and a dog dreams under the stove. You thank the stove and her steady hands. Orders spit you forward before pride grows roots. Road dust becomes duckboard sway. Barns turn back into bays. The language of birds gives way to the grammar of shells. You step into your old corner like a tenant who kept the rent paid and finds the walls still standing. The brazier sulks until a few clever holes help it breathe. You unpack the helmet and it answers light like an honest tool. The fat jar clinks. The knife lies ready on its cloth. The stone waits like a sober friend. You bait traps with biscuit and string and send a runner to ask the next bay about onions. Above, a flare writes a brief letter nobody answers. You read it, stir once, and keep the fire small. By nightfall the pan talks, steam stands, and men line with bowls that have learned patience. The first bite says you are home, in the only way that word works here. Winter presses from above and below. Frost slicks duckboards until ankles argue, and your breath writes brief letters that the wind returns to sender. You bank the brazier under a sheet of pierced tin and coax a proper glow with twigs that used to be label sticks. The helmet warms slow, patient as a hand on a kettle, and fat cracks like subtle applause. You cut thin because thin cooks honest in cold. Men hold bowls inside their coats to hoard heat and watch the rim the way churchgoers watch an altar, quiet, hopeful, little ashamed of it. Lie slow in winter, but they never retire. You pinch, flick, and keep your sleeve moving. The first pieces land, tighten, then slacken into brown that smells like a house you haven't lived in for a long time. Steam fogs your lashes. You wipe with the back of your wrist and turn the pan with a bayonet tip so the edges kiss heat evenly. When the first bowl leaves your hands, the man cradles it like news he can use. He grins into the bowl and the day softens one notch. Trench fever creeps through the platoon like a rumour that pays rent. Knees throb, shins hum, eyes sand over, and tempers go thin at the edges. You line the sick along a dugout wall that drafts like a flute and set water to boil because you cannot bargain with heat. Broth happens. Bones, onion, a pepper miracle, meat shaved to persuade a stubborn throat. You scratch initials into spoon handles so germs keep to their own kit, then boil the helmet when the last bowl empties. The strap gets its own scald. The liner steams like a shirt with opinions. You set bowls where hands can find them and breathe at a steady pace so your own head keeps its balance. A fevered lad sips, grimaces, then asks for salt with a whisper that sounds like you just remembered his name. You measure a pinch on the blade and tap it in. The broth stops arguing. You watch colour return to his face in practical inches and wonder how many quiet bowls it takes to walk a man back to himself. Morning parade finds you half a step slower and twice as tidy. Rifles stack in threes, bolts whisper, and the sergeant measures faces the way a grocer measures butter. You've hidden a sliver of bacon grease under the liner to scent the day. Nobody asks why your corner smells like memory. After inspection you mend the parapet with sandbags that sigh, boards that complain, and wire that bites even through gloves. The terrier patrols like a small colonel, tail flagging, nose filing reports. A French sapper trades nails for broth and shows you how to bend a clever hook that keeps the pan level on a skittish brazier. You scrape frost from the helmet rim with your thumb and pocket the ice, as if thrift might warm you. By noon, the sun pretends it manners. By 2, it sulks off. You count skins drying on pegs, tug one to test the stretch, and cut a thumb patch for a mate who insists he never feels cold. He does. You hand it over with a look you pretended not to save, and decide honesty can wait until supper. A crate of jam arrives looking heroic and leaves the bays sticky with negotiation. You spear the lid with a bayonet, carve fair cubes, and hand them out to spoons that suddenly remember manners. Jam meets bread, then meat, then bread again, and you discover the glaze you didn't know you were inventing. Sweet, salt, crisp, silence. You save a spoon for the runner who eats standing and another for the fever lad who failed at breakfast. When the crate empties, you rinse the helmet hot and scrub the rim with bread so no sugar crystal burns tomorrow. The brazier pops a protest, you hush it with a lid. Someone calls the dish a cafe special and earns a half smile and 3 raised eyebrows. You chalk a note on a crate, jam last not first, and pin it near the peg where the skins hang. It looks like a rule written by a village council. You nod to it anyway and go back to the queue, which somehow grew while you weren't looking. Night settles with a fog that makes distance lie. You sit the listening post with gloves stiff as rules and keep your chin at the plank so the horizon cannot count you. Out there, shapes invent themselves. Stumps, helmets, wishes, and you let them, because shooting ghosts costs cartridges. The fog beads on the helmet's rim and slides toward the coals in small rivers. A rat perches on a broken pick handle and grooms like a critic. You toss a pebble and it hops away exactly 3 boards. When the flare lifts, you flatten, breathe once, then feel your shoulder relax as darkness comes back to full thickness. Relief taps you twice, and you back out the way you crawled in. Slow, careful, uninteresting. The brazier greets you like a low door held open. You lift the lid, test heat with your palm, and lay in 2 strips and an onion ring for those who sat beside you counting the same ghosts. You swallow, breathe once, and put water on before your hands remember to shake. Your kit tells the story even when your mouth keeps quiet. The helmet's inside is a map of polish and scratch, the strap thinned where fingers carried it from fire to peg 100 times. The knife takes a clean edge faster now. The stone has a groove where habit lives. The fat jar keeps score in lines you scratched with a nail, each mark a spoon earned, traded or gifted. Your shirt holds the shadow of a letter you've read enough to memorise and not enough to cure. When a new lad asks what matters, you point without speeches, heat, quiet, fair shares, and the knife kept honest. You pass him the stone and watch his wrist learn the small, steady circle that turns work into supper. He listens the way men do when the lesson contains mercy. Later you rack the helmet on its peg, wipe the rim with bread, and lay the knife on its cloth. The brazier lowers its voice. Somewhere a rat skitters. The pan answers with a hiss that sounds like a compass finding north. Snow edges the parapet and turns every surface into a handwriting lesson in white. You tuck your scarf into your collar and feel wool thaw, where breath meets fabric. The brazier needs coaxing, a thin blue tongue insisting on witnesses. You feed it slivers of crate, twist a wick from bandage offcuts, and dip it in yesterday's fat. The helmet warms with that slow patience you trust. You make a dough with flour traded from the cook, A pinch of salt and tea for water, because tea is best at pretending to be something else. You smear the bowl with grease, press a disc with your palm and lay it flat so the edges blister first. Rat strips sear on the hot half, bread browns on the cool, and the rim collects the good crumbs. You turn with a bayonet tip because no one kept a spatula. When the flatbread puffs, you prick it twice, salt late and stack it in a folded ground sheet. Men watch without asking. Steam stands like a small flag. You cut fair quarters, pass the first to sentry, and nod to the runner who lost his pencil and found the patrol anyway. Your hands learn a tanner's work they never asked for. Skins dry on pegs in the angle where wind cannot argue, and you rub them with fat to keep them from turning to glass. A cobbler shows you the stitch that bites and holds. Thumbs thank him when wire hisses against wool. You cut a strip long as a strap and bind a mate's heel before it makes a liar of him. For mittens, you trace an old sock on two skins, coarse side out for grip, small gusset at the thumb so it bends without sulking. Bone goes to stock, scraped clean, cracked and simmered when water offers itself. The broth learns onion and the colour of honesty. You skim with the spoon you marked with your initials so fevers keep to their own kit. When the brazier hums, you heat a needle and lance a small boil on your wrist, then wash with boiled tea and pretend the sting is simply proof of industry. Work first, comfort if it fits. The line across from you grows talkative at dusk. Someone plays a mouth organ in a key the fog understands. The tune drifts over the wire like laundry, familiar and too far, and men stop their hands a moment to listen. You lift a mirror on a stick and catch a stripe of light from their side. It winks once and disappears. There is shouting in 3 languages, none of it brave, all of it human. You keep your head down and your pan low, because music does not stop bullets. Still, you dust a little flour over the meat to catch the browning and think of kitchens that trusted song. A mate hums along until a sharp crack reminds everyone about skylines. The last notes fall harmless as soot. You turn the strips, drag a rim of bread through the fat and tap the pan once to ask for quiet. Steam answers with a hiss that could be applause if anyone were reckless enough to clap. You share the browned ends like punctuation, a little sentence everyone understands. Inventory becomes evening ritual. You count matches, candles, onions and traps. You scrape the fat jar's side with a finger and tally the scratches you cut, as if they're days in a calendar you trust more than orders. The knife gets a slow drink of oil, the stone a wipe, the strap its daily boil if water allows. You unlace boots to the 3rd hole and powder socks as if you're polishing brass. Feet keep faith only with attention. A mate asks for a share against tomorrow because he drew wiring. You note it with a glance you'll remember later when the pan goes light. The terrier earns his ration with a rat dropped like a coin at your heel. You pay him in crisp and praise. You patch a mitt with skin shaved thin, stitched neat, bite thread, and feel old trades you never held learn your name. The brazier settles to a glow. You bank coals with a lid and set a tin to catch drips from the dugout roof. Lists keep fear in uniform. You keep making lists. Chores turn worry into something your hands can carry. A trench mortar lands close enough to change opinions. The blast takes a bite from the parapet and litters your corner with boards that used to spell fragile on their sides. You feel each rib test its hinges, taste chalk and check that your hands still count to 10. The brazier capsizes. You kill its glow with a lid and write it with a curse so mild the padre would let it pass. The helmet skids, clangs, and rests upside down like a beetle that gave up. A dent kisses the rim and you run a thumb over it the way you'd soothe a bruise. Sand and splinters salt the pan. You shake, rinse with boiled water, and scrape the steel until it remembers its job. Men reappear from doorways as if the trench had been breathing in. Eyes reset, jokes arrive on tiptoe, and a cough from 3 bays down means carry on. You relight, test heat with your palm, and lay in 2 strips for the lads who are out on the step. The first hiss resets the room. Your heart adopts a slower beat. Work returns you to the shape of yourself. Rum arrives late and thin, but men walk straighter for it. Cups make rounds and cheeks warm past intention. You portion a fry for the quartermaster because he remembered soap last week, and he pretends not to notice your ledger. A sapper brings a twist of dried herbs from home, and you crumble a pinch between finger and thumb, letting the smell conjure tiles that never knew mud. You scatter it late so the green won't turn bitter, then chase the edges with bread. The pan answers clean and the rim shines where you wipe with the heel. You hide one crisp strip under a crust for the fever lad who sleeps mean and wakes hungry. You save another for the sentry who never asks. The helmet dries upside down on its peg, dent toward the wall like modesty. You hang the straps separate so lice must commute. You douse the brazier to a red coin and wrap your scarf near your mouth. In the dark, the saved strip will find the right hands without help from you. You build an oven from faith and scrap. 2 biscuit tins nest with a thumb's width between, perforated sides breathing like fish gills. A trench candle sits low on bricks. A broken mess tin becomes a door that slides and sulks. You line the helmet with a smear of fat, dust it with flour, and pat out small rounds the size of a palm. Rat mince mixes with onion, a pinch of tea leaf, and a spoon of dripping until it clings like it wants a job. You fold pasties with wet fingers, crimp with a fork you found under duck boards, and lay them so the hot side catches first. The tin hums, the seams darken, and steam curls from the door in tidy prayers. You rotate the helmet a quarter turn every 2 minutes because even heat is a moral duty. When the crust freckles, you lift one with the bayonet and knock the bottom, hollow, ready, honest. You parcel the first to sentries, the second to the runner, and keep a small one for the lad who can't shake his shivers. Nobody asks for sauce. Nobody needs it. Dawn's stand to stretches your eyelids thin. Rifle set, bayonets point at gloom, and you taste old smoke and new frost while the horizon pretends to decide. The brazier whispers under the board, hidden from eyes you don't like, and the pasties finish with their little sighs. A shell drops a field away and folds a tree like laundry. You count to 3, then 5, then stop counting because the pattern says move on. You pass the pan along the bay, keeping the rim low, and hands rise without leaving posts. A mate bites and tries not to smile because teeth are political here. Pepper rides the last pinch of a folded scrap. You measure it with a superstition that feels like science. The sergeant walks the line, boots certain, and accepts a pasty the size of his grammar. He chews, looks at the sky, and nods once. You tuck the helmet flat under a tarp and let heat drift over your boots. No delivery app, just you. Water wants to make you sick and you refuse politely. You set a cloth in a funnel, pour through to catch the day's floaters, and boil until the lid dances an honest jig. A spoon of tea forgives the flavour of canvas. A pinch of chloride makes the canteen think about being respectable. You wash the helmet when the boil calms, sending grey whirls down the sump like tired ghosts. Strap off, liner out, both scolded until they stop arguing. The chin strap sleeps on a peg with the dignity of a retired snake. Bowls get dipped in a bucket you keep mean and hot. Spoons live in a mess tin that simmers while you work. A new lad tries to rinse his hands in cold water and you hand him the boiled instead, then show him the rash he won't miss. He nods and swaps buckets with the gravity of a convert. The brazier pops once like applause. Hygiene isn't brave, it's stubborn. The medical orderly sets up a clinic under boards that leak in alphabetical order. He checks the rat-bitten man's wrist, presses, nods, and tells you to keep the strap boiled and the knife cleaner than sermons. You show him the jar, the stone, the cloth, and the little ledger in your head. Who's had fever? Who returns the spoon? Who needs salt more than pride? He writes nothing about your pan, everything about your rules. A lieutenant wanders by wearing worry like a new coat and asks what smells so organised. You stand straight, helmet empty, and list ingredients. Onion, flour, salt, fat. He looks relieved you didn't say anything French and drifts off to grade sandbags. The orderly takes a pasty and bites like a man betting his licence. He nods once, says, "Heat is medicine," and leaves you a roll of bandage that will later become wicks, patches and courage. You tuck it away and go back to counting matches. Rain returns mean and loud. You rig a lean-to with a ground sheet, 2 bayonets and a promise. Then bank the brazier where drips can't tattle to night scopes. A poilu arrives grinning with a wine bottom that holds 2 brave swallows and a fist of garlic that smells like a decision. You slice thin, brown the slivers at the rim until the trench smells like kitchens with floors, splash the wine, and listen to the pan take clean breath. He teaches you the word fond, and you repay him with crisp, and a strip held like a treaty. A German flare lifts far off, a cold flower. Everyone freezes for its bloom, then resumes being hungry. You give the poilu the browned end, and he gives you a tin badge with a rooster stamped into it, cheap as laughter. You hang it on the peg above the helmet so the trench has a mascot that doesn't bite. The rain drums time and the pass grows briefly edible. When quiet returns, you write a letter while the coals think. Dear all, you start, which covers more ground than names can, and you record small triumphs, socks that dried, a terrier promoted, pasties that didn't leak. You do not write the word rat, you say game, which is also true in its way. You ask for onions, pepper, cocoa, laces, and any fat the grocer can be shamed into parting with. You thank your mother for the scarf and your sister for the postcard, which now lines your kit lid like wallpaper. You fold the sheet by lamplight and use a crumb of wax to seal it. The stamp goes on straight because some rules still matter. Then you scrape the pan with bread and tuck the heel into a rag for the man at listening post. The helmet cools on its peg, rooster guarding, straps sleeping separate so commuters suffer. You lie down with boots loosened, hands smelling of flour and iron, and sleep arrives the way steam does, quiet, warm, and necessary. You start a salvage day the way a grocer starts market. List first, hands next. Wire offcuts for hooks, crate slats for lids, a petrol tin that wants to be a brazier, nails you bully straight with the back of a knife. The helmet earns new dignity when you punch 2 small holes near the rim and thread a bent wire cradle so it rides level even when the ground sulks. Fat warms slow because damp learned patience. You keep the lid half on so the wind stops lecturing. A mate bumps the stand and the pan slews, slopping a spit of fat across his wrist. You yank him to the water, cool the burn in a mess tin, and wrap with gauze like you were born orderly. He grins and calls you mother. You tell him to lift the stand next time. Back at the pit, you wedge a flatter stone, test the balance with a coin, and let the steel come back to heat. The brazier sighs, the rim beads, and the first strips lie down obedient. You whisper a rule to the bay, fire is a tool, not a pet. Heads nod, work continues. Supplies go wrong at dusk. The ration party takes a short way across a sap that never liked soldiers, and meets shrapnel that liked them less. You hear the change in the air before the sound arrives. It flattens the trench like a firm hand. You grab the stretcher handles, follow the sergeant's boots, and find 2 men sitting without words, one with a stripe of metal through his sleeve, and the other already grey at the edges. You cut cloth, pack with a pad, and tie off above the leak with a strip torn from a clean shirt. The orderly nods you to pour. You tip boiled water slow while he binds. Someone starts to talk about mail and then stops. The wounded man blinks, breath returns, and the trench loosens its jaw. You carry him back in cadence, counting planks. At the brazier you screen the flame, settle the helmet, and stir the stew that waited. Bowls go to stretcher men first. A lad tries a joke and can't finish it. Heat finishes it for him. Dust shakes itself out and remembers to be night. You try fritters because flour sulks when it sits. A batter grows in a mess tin. Flour, tea, a pinch of salt, and the last whisper of pepper hoarded under a sock. Meat goes in thin, dusted first, dipped, then laid away from you so splashes miss the wrist you owe to tomorrow. The helmet holds a shallow pond of fat that behaves like an old pond. Slow rings, then clean bubbles. Pieces turn gold at the corners and you flip with a bayonet tip that now feels like a proper tool. You drain them on a rag that used to be a sleeve and listen to the brittle talk they make while cooling. Onion slivers brown at the rim and come out sweet as apology. You break a fritter to check the middle, count to 3 and taste. It is crisp, hot and certain. Men drift nearer the way cats would if the army allowed cats. You share fairly, salt late and pocket one for the sentry who never asks. Somebody says bistro. You let him live. A new draft arrives, caps set like Sunday, and watches you chat seams as if it were a magic act. You hand them candles, line them along the dugout, and teach the quick rule. Hold the cloth tight, run the flame fast, keep moving so the eggs pop before the wall sulks. You show mask drill again because nerves knock timing out of fingers. You speak about trench fever in the voice you use for recipes. Bites make fevers, heat kills eggs, soap when you can, boiling when soap sulks. One lad almost faints at the word lice. You sit him, hand him broth, and make the world small. He sips, colour returns, and pride rebuttons itself. You pass round thumb patches cut from cured skins and watch surprise turn into approval. They ask about the pan. You tell them rules first, meat second. The rules are heat, cleanliness, and fair shares. Nobody argues. They were hungry before they met you. Now they're hungry with instructions. Shells revisit at supper and the trench learns the old posture again. You cap the brazier, pinch the wick, and cover the helmet with a board so heat stays home. A slab drops from the parapet and leaves a window where the rain looks in. You drag a wounded man from the step by his collar and find the breath with a hand on his ribs. It is there, small but working. The orderly needs hot water and clean cloth. You deliver both and keep your mouth asleep. When he nods, you go back to the pan, uncover, relight, and skim off grit with the edge of a lid. Flour tightens the stew, onion rights its temper, and pepper remembers the last scrap. Bowls go out in order. Sick, sentry, then the rest. When the barrage walks away to a different village, the bay exhales as one body. Someone claims the stew never tasted better. Someone else calls him a ghoul. You rinse the helmet with boiling water until the rim stops crunching. Sleep refuses to stay, so you make a quiet round. You patrol the traps, take 2 clean ones, and leave the small one for the terrier because he found it first. You oil the knife and find a nick from an impatient bone. The stone hums while it forgets the mistake. You count matches twice and breathe easier. A letter waits under your shirt. You read it again and hear a lane, a gate, a kettle that boils without being guarded. You fold the paper carefully and put it back where warmth keeps it friendly. The brazier banks to a red coin. You set a tin to catch a drip, tuck the helmet on its peg and loop the strap separate. The trench settles into the slow shared snore of men who finally beat the day. You scratch once on reflex and laugh at yourself in the dark. Then you close your eyes and let the quiet keep watch. Rations wobble again, but the day holds steady enough to plan. You set bones to simmer in a mess tin propped above a shy flame, crack them once with the back of the knife so marrow remembers its duty, and nudge in onion until it stops being sharp. The helmet waits for the fry that follows the broth. The brazier keeps both honest with a lid tilted to manage smoke. A runner from the next bay leans in, eyes on the steam, and offers a stub of pepper hidden in waxed paper. You pay him in 2 bowls for his section and a promise about century shares. The broth turns from grey to agreeable. Scum lifts and you skim it with a spoon that carries your scratched initials. When it tastes ready, you pass mugs before the meat goes on, because warmth is medicine and patience earns its meal. You keep back a ladle for the fever case and another for the wiring party, then set the helmet to sizzle. The first strips lie flat, edges tight, and the day loosens its jaw. Pepper dusts the pan late. Steam stands and does its quiet work. Lice mount another campaign as if discipline were optional. You strip to the waist under the lean-to, chat every seam with a travelling candle, and watch eggs surrender in neat bursts that sound like a tiny hailstorm. Shirts ride a wire over the brazier to bake. Blankets go to the drum the sappers made from paraffin tins and stubbornness. You boil the chin strap alone 2 full minutes, turning it with a stick so fingers stay out. A recruit scratches until his ears redden. You teach the pinch and roll and the rule about not visiting your eyes. He learns quick because itch talks louder than sermons. The knife gets a boil, then a film of oil. The stone keeps its small, steady circle until the edge tells the truth. You dust patties with powder, trade a thumb patch cut from cured skin, and mark a line on the fat jar for later. When the shirts crackle back from heat, you pull one on while it is still warm enough to pretend kindness. For an hour, the itch backs away like a rude guest. Gas shells drop short in the afternoon, little coughs that pretend to be ordinary until noses argue. The rattle claws the air. You seat the mask by muscle and count breaths while the cloud sulks along the lip of the trench. Rain turns it petty and makes the ground taste mean. You cap the brazier and wait, hand on the helmet as if a tool could be steadied by yours. A lad down the bay breathes too fast. You tap his shoulder and copy slow, steady, patient until his chest obeys. When the gong finally releases the hour, you boil water, boil again, then boil the strap because habit is cheaper than fever. The helmet gets a scalded rinse. The rim shines dull and honest. You start with the broth for the rattled, thin but hot, salt measured on the knife tip. Colour returns to faces in small practical inches. Only when breathing stops arguing do you lay in the meat. It hisses like a promise kept. The bay eats in order, sick sentry, then the rest. No one jokes, they will later. Mail delivers a parcel that thinks ahead. Inside sits a small tin labelled curry, a relic from a grocer who learned sailors' tricks. You pry it open, respect the sharp breath that escapes, and promise the bay you'll be sensible. The helmet warms, a spoon of fat learns colour, onion turns glassy, then polite. You dust a pinch over the oil so it blooms, add meat in small, well-behaved handfuls, and stir steady until the smell says, "Go on." Tea stands in for water. Flour tightens things enough to cling to bread. The colour deepens to a shade that would make a quartermaster nervous, and you smile without explaining. Bowls cue themselves. You portion fairly, an extra spoon for the runner who will trot the wire after dark, and a crisp end for the man who sat up with the fever lad last night. Silence lands, then a low murmur of approval not aimed at anyone. You put the tin away like treasure and scratch a mark on the jar. One pinch spent, several left. Discipline required. Ethics wander through the bay with the smoke. A corporal says vermin, a private says game. The padre says nothing and holds out his plate like a parishioner who knows God reads intentions. You tell the story you always tell. Clean hands, clean blade. Heat until the pan stops hissing. You remind them liver stays out and bile must die whole. You point to the boiling strap like a signboard. The debate softens at the edges when bowls grow light. A lad admits he kept his share for a mate at listening post. You nod and top his, then top the mate's when he returns, because fairness tastes better than principle here. The padre thanks you in a voice that sounds like bread and does not name the meat. The corporal eats, sighs, and calls it survival. You say supper and let the word do the work. By the time the rim is wiped with bread, the argument has tucked itself away like cutlery after a wake. Night lays its hand over the line and you take first watch at the listening post, cheek in mud, rifle relaxed, ears sorting rat from boot from wishful thinking. A flare lifts far off. You fold yourself small until it gutters out. Your fingers find the terrier's ruff, and he sighs like a kettle settling. Behind you, the brazier holds a red coin under a board. In front, the waist holds shapes that stay shapes, which is the best you can ask. Somewhere a fox barks and the sound comes back thin and strange. You count slow between drips in a broken tin, because counting something you can hear is better than counting what you can only fear. When relief comes, you hand over the code, tap twice on the stock and crawl back by inches, letting the boards remember your knees. The helmet waits on its peg, dry now, dent turned to the wall like modesty. You bank the coals, set a trap and cut a small share for the sentries stepping out. Work returns your breath to you. Then sleep tries its luck. Morning treads in on boards that learned your rhythm, and you answer it with chores that make the day behave. You scrape last night's soot from the brazier holes with a nail, rotate the tin so the wind minds its manners, and test the helmet's dent with a thumb until it feels like an old joke again. The rooster badge blinks from its peg above the pan, ridiculous and somehow good for morale. You boil the strap, boil the knife, then boil a rag because repetition is the only officer who keeps his hours. The fat jar yields a spoon that smells faintly of onion and hope. You score a new line on its side with a nail so the ledger stays honest. Bowls are scalded in a mess tin, spoons simmered until they stop arguing, and the board over the brazier gets a fresh corner to hide glow from glass. You check traps, reset 2 with biscuit dust, and bait a 3rd with rind. Routine is mercy here, and you hand it out with both hands. You go forward at noon with a wiring party that believes in pockets. Beyond the fire step, the ground remembers farms, and turnip tops push through frost like shy fists. You work with quick eyes, half watching the sky, half watching a glove pry a stump free. A bullet snips a tuft of grass and everyone forgets to breathe, then remembers in the agreed order. You lift 2 stunted roots from a scraped row, brush mud, and slide them into your sack like contraband that also counts as vegetables. A mate prizes a beet shaped like a fist and grins as if he robbed a bank for soup. On the crawlback you freeze twice for flares, and once for a shape that turns into a stump, then you reach the parapet with your heart still in your chest. In the bay you scrub the roots hard, slice thin as coins, and let them brown at the rim while the pan talks. The sweetness arrives slow, honest, and the stew forgives the day. A letter walks in wearing your mother's hand. She encloses a clipping for suet dumplings, cheerful as church notices, and 2 pages about coal men who still sing at corners. You fold the paper along your thigh and edit the recipe with trench logic. Fat for suet, tea for water, flour for hope. You stir until the paste pulls from the tin, then drop spoonfuls into a mess tin set over the brazier's least jealous heat. Lids on, patience engaged. While they steam, you shave meat thin and let it hiss in the helmet with onion, the scent stepping over the parapet like a friendly ghost. When the dumplings lift, pale and proud, you seat them on top and spoon fat over like weather. The first bowl goes to the man who can't keep food down unless it is simple, the second to Sentry, the third to a lad who traded pepper for quiet. Your own portion waits until the cue means done, and then you eat standing, grateful for chew that doesn't bite back. Loss comes in a short sentence. A shell lands 1 traverse over and takes the quiet man who always tied good knots. The sergeant says his name once, steady, like a lid set down. You help sew him into the ground sheet, 2 needles biting in turn, and press the label into the seam because paper needs help to reach home. The Padre speaks a paragraph the sky doesn't keep. Wind edits him into fragments. You square the cross, pat the soil, and lay a small chip of bread on top because empty hands feel rude. Back in the bay you boil the helmet twice, wash the knife, and fry for the burial party, onion soft and meat cut respectful. Men eat with hats off, bowls held close, and no one plays brave. After, you sit with your back to the wall and let the coals find a lower voice. You scratch his name on your cuff in pencil, then trace it once so the line will last a day longer. An officer with a map pretends not to see your trade, then asks about hygiene like a school inspector. You show the boil, the stone, the cloth. The strap hung separate so commuters suffer. You speak the rules as if reciting field service. Guts out fast, bile whole, liver binned, hands rinsed in boiled tea, salt late, heat until the hiss falls quiet. He watches your knife work on a carcass and nods when the skin peels clean. A young lad stands beside him, trying not to look green. You hand the lad the stone and teach the small circle that turns worry into edge. When the pan speaks, you portion for sick first and Sentry next, while the officer studies the cue as if it were a diagram. He clears his throat and says he never saw any of this, then asks for the recipe for onion at the rim. Later he returns with soap, which is the only permission that counts. Night shrinks the world to the brazier's small democracy. You bank the coals, set the helmet level, and share the last crisp with the terrier who guarded the traps like a clerk guarding stamps. A lad on listening post tucks a dumpling into his pocket and grins like he's stealing from victory. Frost climbs the rim, steam holds it off by inches. You hang the strap where stars can't find it, and roll your socks over a peg so morning will have one small gift. The queue thins, bowls stack, and the trench breathes like a tired animal that chose to live. You mark a line on the jar, wipe the rim with bread, and douse the flame until the dark grows honest. Sleep takes you by the collar and lowers you without argument. Somewhere down the bay, a man coughs a number and another answers, and the code settles every shoulder by an inch. You tuck the knife into its cloth, feel the day leave your hands, and let the trench hold you level. Thaw comes like a slow mistake and tests every joint the trench ever promised. Boards shift, nails argue, and your little oven of tins sags as if it missed breakfast. You set the brazier on 2 flatter bricks, drag a dry plank from the ration dump's roof, and rebuild with the patience of someone who has already done today twice. The helmet's dent gets another thumbs check and earns its usual pardon. You boil the strap because mud learned to travel. You boil the knife because hands forget and memory is not soap. Skins on the pegs tighten, then slacken in damp. You rub them with a whisper of fat so they stay useful. The rooster badge watches from its peg, silly and loyal. Traps catch 2 clean, 1 small, and your hands move before your head writes opinions. Gut to sump, bile whole, liver binned, rinse with tea, salt late, your creed. Onion sweats at the rim, and the pan's talk steadies the bay. A new lad asks if this is the job now. You nod. Work first, names later. Supper will teach him the rest. A night patrol tumbles back with more breath than they carried out, and one prisoner who looks like a man who misread a sign. He stares at the helmet like it might explain the war, and keeps his hands high even after you tell him to sit. The sergeant unties the neat knots he learned at drill and ties new ones he learned here. The prisoner asks for water in a voice that could be anyone's uncle. You hand him a mug and watch his eyes find steam. He flinches at a flare that isn't there, then settles when onion announces itself. You do not speak his language, but meat is a dialect with reach. You slide him a small piece on crust and he eats with the caution of a man who's been wrong before. For 1 minute the trench is a room with bad paint. You portion for sentries, then stretcher men, then the quiet stranger. The sergeant pretends to check rifles, and you pretend to ignore his nod. He makes a short treaty. It holds. Mail from home says rationing begins and tea is now philosophy. Your mother writes about queuing at dawn and the way sugar hides behind counters. She encloses 3 recipes that make more from less, and a note that says she knows you're doing the same. You read the letter twice, and your hands remember a kitchen with a clock that kept time without orders. You fold the paper along your thigh and tuck it under your shirt where ink feels like warmth. A mate passes a chipped mug. You pour him the last of yesterday's broth, and he pretends not to read your face. The talk in the bay turns practical. What grows in window boxes, how to bully taste from roots, why onions are saints if saints made soup. You add a line to your own rules, save a spoon for the man who eats slow. When the pan hushes, you set aside 2 strips under a rag for the runner and for the man who never asks. Habit is mercy that remembers names. Fat runs low, so you render a jar from skins and scraps with the care you give to knives. Bits go in cold, the helmet sits low, and you stir slow until blisters widen and the talk turns clear. Cracklings rise like a good idea. You fish them with a fork and pay them out to hands that work the wire. The jar warms and you strain through muslin that once believed it was dressing, watching gold turn obedient. A sapper shows you how to twist a wick that burns long and steady. You trade him crisp and a grin. You pour 1 tin of clean fat into the candle mould for nights when light must whisper. The rest lives under cloth in the cool corner, and you scratch a new line on the glass with a nail. The helmet gets a boil, then a wipe with bread, because thrift tastes better that way. You teach 2 recruits the difference between smoke you can hide and smoke that tells tales. They nod, memorize, and stand closer to the windbreak. A shell chooses your corner and revises the evening. The breath leaves your chest the way a plug leaves a sink. Boards lift and you find yourself beneath a world that suddenly wants new math. Splinters bite your sleeve. A pebble kisses your cheek and leaves a wet comma. You curl into the angle, cap the brazier with a board, and hold the helmet under your arm like a child you mean to keep. The second burst walks away down the line and your ears press a ringing that insists on words later. A mate's hand finds your collar, checks ribs, counts you present, then shoves your chin up so breath can find work again. You test hands, then knife, then strap, and discover a shallow cut that will scold you for a week. The orderly nods, tapes it neat, and orders broth. You obey because orders that feed are clever. When the hiss returns, smaller and stubborn, you lay in meat for the men who hauled boards and a little more for the one who made sure your lungs remembered. The dent checks out. So do you. Night gives you a quieter road than you deserve. Stars hang above the wire like coins no one will spend, and frost writes careful notes on the rim of the pan. You portion slowly, naming men in your head the way a clerk names tools before he locks the door. The terrier thumps his tail exactly twice after his share, and then curls against your boot as if your warmth belongs to him by regulation. You think of a lane where cabbage rows keep their lines, and a kettle that doesn't need guarding, and the thought lands without breaking. You decide to teach the new lads your whole ledger tomorrow. Traps, seams, fat, fairness, boiling, strap, stone, spoon marks, and the rule about not lying to hungry men. The helmet dries on its peg, rooster above, strap separate so lice must commute. You bank the coals to a red coin and tie your letter inside your shirt. Sleep arrives like steam, quiet, warm and necessary. You let it take you because the queue is gone and the pan is clean. The thaw breeds a different trouble. Everything alive gets braver. Rats swagger, daylight roots, whiskers up, bellies round from other people's mistakes. You set bells on strings along the traverse so small thieves announce themselves. Tin lids chime like poor wind. A mate swears he saw one drag a candle by the wick. You believe him because you once watched one carry a button like a medal. You reset traps with biscuit paste and a smear of grease you'd rather keep, then post the terrier like a clerk at a stamp window. To snap before you count to 50. You move quick, pinch behind the head, neat cut, hide teased free in one long peel, tail and feet to the sump, gut binned whole, bad bits gone where the water forgets. The pan warms while you work. Onion waits at the rim like an usher. You salt late, pepper later, and keep the rim wiped with bread so sugar doesn't burn twice. Men drift near, bowls in their coats, pretending to examine sandbags. You pretend not to notice. The brazier talks like a calm friend. A fever case goes wrong and teaches new rules. The lad's pulse races like boots on duckboards, and his eyes ride the distance. The orderly asks for heat, water, and quiet in that order. You tilt the helmet to boil while another man holds a cup against trembling lips. You time the scald by the watch you only trust for boiling. Bowls are scrubbed twice, spoons simmered, strap boiled because worry likes habits. You make broth so mild it almost hides. Bones to water, onion to manners, fat to strength. When he finally swallows, the colour that returns isn't heroic. Just human enough to try again. You lay a rag under his head so lice lose their footing, then wash your hands with the boiled tea you keep for such days. After, you clean the pan as if the king would use supper and hang it high to dry. Dent turned shy to the wall. Nobody claps. Work continues. The lesson writes itself on your fingers. Heat first, taste later. A sapper with a grin like a pry bar shows you a trick for air. He punches holes along the brazier rim at neat intervals and wedges a tin lid as a sliding vent. Flame learns to breathe without telling neighbours. You trade him cracklings and the good end of a browned strip. He trades you calm fire and a story about a bakery in Rouen where night bread rose to the rhythm of carts. With steadier heat you try a proper sear, laying strips without crowding, turning once when the pan's voice drops from angry to confident. Onion sweats at the edge. A coin of beet joins, sugaring where metal runs hottest. You deglaze with a lick of tea and a pinch from the curry tin you ration by nail marks. The sauce glosses meat like a coat that finally fits. Even the skeptic from 2 bays down eats without finding a doctrine. You write vent, not chimney on a crate with chalk, and for once the trench keeps the lesson. Shells come saying nothing and leave you a puzzle. A near one shaves the parapet and buries the terrier up to his neck. You dig him free with both hands and he shakes off mud like a small explosion, then sneezes, offended by physics. A board lands square across the brazier. You cap the flame before sparks walk the trench and sweep hot cinders into a shallow scrape you keep for such arguments. The helmet skids, dents complaining to a nail. You run a thumb over the new bruise and forgive it out loud because you want the men to hear you forgive something today. You rinse with a scald, scrape with sand and light again, setting a board as a low screen so glow can't gossip to glass. 2 pieces fell in mud. You wash, salt, and feed them to the sump without speeches. Rules hurt less than the alternative. When the hiss returns, steadier, men breathe again. You count heads by shoulders, then by spoons. The numbers match. It will do. On a quiet afternoon, you inventory thrift. Skins dry into thumb guards, heel patches, and a clumsy coin purse for matches you cannot spare. You rub each with a whisper of fat so they bend without sulking. Bones boil to a pale stock that learns onion and pepper's last whisper, then gets poured through muslin to lose grit because grit soils moods. Cracklings pay wages in brittle talk. The jar gets another line scratched by nail to record wealth that won't reach a bank. You stitch a mitten with coarse thread and a sailor's knot the poilu taught you, then patch a strap's chafe with leather that used to twitch. A recruit asks why you keep a ledger in scratches. You tap the jar, the strap, the spoon handles with initials, and the peg where the strap sleeps far from the pan. Because memory fails long before appetite. He nods like a man who has misplaced things and holds the jar with 2 hands when you let him. Night brings a trench-raid rumour that fails to mature, leaving your nerves overcooked. You sit listening post with the terrier's warm weight against your boot and count left-right sweeps until your eyes stop inventing helmets. Far out, someone coughs once, then twice in a rhythm you don't recognise. The wire answers with a tiny musical sigh and then gives nothing away. You back out by inches, touch the board that hides the brazier, and lift it like a curtain. The coals show red honesty. The pan warms to a low hiss. You fry small and hot, 2 strips, 1 onion ring, a coin of beet, enough for you and the man who relieved you, not enough to tempt luck. You wipe the rim with bread, salt lace and split fair, first bite to the sentry, second to the terrier, third to you. Steam lifts and the night shrinks to a manageable size. You bank the flame to a red coin and hang the strap on its solitary peg. Sleep tests the door and you let it in. Orders arrive with a broom and an account book. Tails turned in for a penny, bodies burned, trenches kept sanitary by decree. The quartermaster nails a notice to a post that already holds a dozen private laws and stares at his pencil like it owes him rent. You count the ways this helps and the ways it lies. Bounty means traps built better. Wire snares tuned sharp. Hinge traps that close like decisions. Bells tied to string so thefts declare themselves. It means sacks labelled clean and not, knives boiled before and after, and a brazier screened so glow doesn't gossip to glass. You do the neat work, pinch behind the head, slit, peel, feet off, tail off into a tin that clicks like small coins. The terrier patrols like a clerk. He earns his wages in ribs. The orderly approves the burning pit that smokes at the corner, and you shovel ash over remains the way a baker closes his oven at night. You leave the tails for the quartermaster with a face that doesn't ask for thanks. He gives a nod worth about a halfpenny. You boil the strap anyway. Scrap becomes a grill because grease is generous and crispness is morale. You cut a rectangle from a wire gabion lid, hammer its edges quiet, and set it an inch above the helmet's pool on 2 nails punched through the rim. Meat sits high, fat rains down and shouts, and the pan answers with a voice that means business. Onion sweats at the border like a tax collector. A coin of beet takes the hottest corner and turns sugar honest. You remember the poilu's word, fond, and scrape it with a lick of tea that carries yesterday's smoke without apology. The glaze hugs the strips, colour deepens, and even sceptical stomachs decide early. You salt late and only enough. Pepper travels by blade tip the way signatures travel on bad paper. When the strips lift clean, you chase the rim with a heel of bread so nothing burns twice, then flip the grill to scorch the next lot free of memory. Sappers arrive by scent and trade nails for seconds. You write mind the nails in your head and serve with the steady hand that keeps queues civil. Knight stumbles back with a man whose hands won't let go of nothing. His eyes look past the board. His breath walks too fast and keeps tripping. The orderly says rest and heat, then leaves you the kind of silence that can only be filled by chores. You build a broth so plain even memory cannot choke on it. Bone, onion, a finger of salt measured on steel, and fat thinned until it forgets to brag. You keep the flame a whisper under tin and keep the helmet's talk low so sound doesn't startle what sleep might gather. When the first bowl is ready, you test it on your lip, then pass it warm and careful, your hand on his wrist in case the world tries to leave again. He sips, blinks, and looks at the pan like it could explain the day. You do not. You refill, wait, breathe at a pace he can borrow. When colour returns, it is not brave, it is serviceable. You fold a blanket, wedge a board against draft, and set a trap out of habit. The brazier keeps its red coin, the knight keeps him. A parcel appears wearing string and kindness. Inside, a paper twist of bay leaves, a bit of rosemary tied with thread, and a note that sets for stews and Sundays. You hold a leaf to your nose and the trench forgets itself for half a breath. Soapstones sink, hot tap that never learned fear, a cupboard that didn't leak. You tuck one leaf at the rim, just a wink of it in fat until it surrenders its quiet bitter. Then you fish it out so it won't boss the pot. Rosemary needles drop 2 by 2 like a polite parade. They survive the heat better than men do. Tea stands in for water again, flour for courage, onion for sense. The helmet speaks in a cleaner accent. Bowls move hand to hand with that stillness men use when something gentle happens in public. You dry 2 leaves and slip them into your letter as if they can travel courage both ways. The rest hide in the fat jar's lid, safe as coin. You scratch a mark on glass. Bay, 2, rosemary, plenty. Ledger keeps you honest. Inspection day arrives in boots that never met mud on purpose. The medical officer carries a book, a thermometer, and a look that has seen arguments. He asks after fevers, bites, latrines. You answer with boiled strap, boiled knife, spoons simmered, bowls scalded, and traps emptied without drama. He raises an eyebrow at the helmet until the orderly says boiled before, boiled after, and points at a page of temperatures that went down since you started keeping heat-light law. The officer tries not to approve, then gives up and approves out loud. He advises vinegar if found, lime if begged, and common sense when the Bible runs short. You nod and demonstrate the seam nick, the peel, the binning of offal, and the rule about liver. He watches the grill rain fat and the glaze come together and says, carefully, that he has no objections to field improvisation. The sergeant hears this and pretends not to. After they go, you fry too thin for the stretchers men, who hauled a case from the sap. They eat standing and call it policy. Late watch hands you the small hours and the long thoughts. Frost tattoos the rim and the rooster badge blinks like a coin in weak light. You take inventory by touch. Stone, knife, strap, spoon, jar, leaves, matches, ledger tucked behind your ribs where memory can find it. You think of what you will carry away if the world lets you leave. The trick of heat you can hide, the way fair shares calm a crowd, the dent that lives under a thumb, the strap hung separate so commuters suffer, the exact second onion stops arguing and begins to help. You hear rats on the boards like rain that hasn't made up its mind. You set 2 traps and the bells answer with modesty. You work quick and quiet, then lay 3 strips on the grill for the lads coming off the post and 1 more for the terrier who expects the world to keep its bargains. Steam climbs into the cold and folds. You salt late. You give first bites away. You keep enough. You let the helmet cool on its peg and breathe until your shoulders remember where they live. The quartermaster's bounty keeps coming, but the real accounting happens at night when the trench quiets enough to hear your own jaw. You sit by the brazier with the strap drying on its solitary peg and the helmet tilted to steam like a polite kettle. Your ledger runs itself. Tails for pay, bones for stock, skins for patches, fat for light, names for bowls. The terrier snores with his nose tucked under his tail. You flick 1 louse into the fire and watch it go off like a seed. A mate asks you, half joking, when you started being the butcher. You answer the only way that doesn't invite shame, when hunger stopped being a rumour. You tell him the rules again. Clean blade, bile whole, liver out, heat until the hiss eases, and he repeats them back like catechism. You portion 2 strips for the sentries and a browned end for the lad who mended wire with bleeding fingers. The helmet's rim catches a bead and lets it run. You wipe it with bread because nothing gets to burn twice if you're awake. The Germans send leaflets that promise soup somewhere not here. They fall like grey birds and lie in puddles until men fish them out with sticks, read, snort and use them for wicks. You hand one to the brazier, flame-licking the big words with more enthusiasm than the small print ever earned. Across the wire, a bugle coughs a sad idea of music and someone answers with a mouth organ in a tune that remembers doors. You pull your cap low and slice onion thin enough to go transparent. It vanishes in fat and reappears as smell that knows how to live with mud. A lad asks if he will ever eat rabbit again. You tell him yes, because lies can also be future tenses. The pan talks low and confident, the way a good sergeant does. Pepper travels by blade's edge. Salt waits until the edges shine. You flip, listen, count to 3 in a language you didn't own before this line, and plate for the men who stand where the wind has opinions. Word comes down for a working party to the rear, and you draw it because steady hands make quartermasters love you. You march past a field where turnips gamble with frost, and into a yard that smells of horses, pitch, and a ghost of apples. A cook there sees your helmet and laughs like he knows a cousin. He hands you a sack of peelings as if he's just knighted you. You sort with a miser's eye. Good onion ends, honest carrot coins, potato shavings that still remember earth, and you wash them in a tub so cold it startles prayer. Back at the bay, you prove a point about poverty and generosity living in the same bowl. Fat first, peelings next, meat last, flour to thicken, tea to persuade, 1 leaf of bay to conduct. You taste, blink, and do not brag. The stew nods back, civilised. You draw a fair line with the ladle. Sick first, sentry next, then the cue that has learned your face means order and heat. For once no one asks for more before the last man gets his first. You find a scrap of wire mesh and finally build what you kept describing, a trivet that earns its keep. 2 nails through the helmet, mesh bridged, fat below, meat above. Grease rain sings and the pan answers like an audience that made time for you. Even browning becomes a kind of hope. The poilu comes by with a handshake of garlic and a faith that must have gotten him through worse kitchens. He presses 2 cloves into your palm and you pretend you can afford to pay him back. You slice thin on the rim until the trench smells like a holiday you'll refuse to name out loud. He teaches you sarriette for the herb he smuggled. You trade him crisp and your last paper twist of salt. You both eat standing, chewing with the same careful gratitude, and for a minute the wire is only a fence. When he goes, he taps the rooster badge, laughs at your dent and calls you chef with a straight face. You bow with the bayonet like a fool and then remember to stir. Delousing returns with spring. Everything that bites decides to have a family meeting. The drum roars, shirts crackle, and the air smells like barber and barn on a bad day. You chat seams, pinch and roll, candle fast along cuffs until the eggs pop in mean little bursts. A recruit catches one between thumbnails and looks at you as if he has committed a crime. You tell him he committed hygiene. The orderly makes his rounds, checking shins for trench fever's handwriting and leaving a bottle of something that smells like a drawer in an old apothecary. You scald bowls, simmer spoons, boil strap, boil knife, boil a rag just because habit is a wall you can lean on. The helmet gets its ritual scrub with sand and the rinse that sends grey curls down the sump. When the first shirt comes back dry and innocent, you pull it on while it is still warm enough to pretend kindness. For 6 minutes the itch stands outside with its cap in its hands. Then it remembers who runs this line. You scratch, swear soft and relight. A letter arrives, folded around a sprig of dried rosemary, the paper smelling of a kitchen drawer and whether you could trust. For your stews, it says, as if you own Sundays. You tuck a pinch into fat at the rim and let it wake without preaching. The flavour sits back where it belongs, small and sure. You keep back 2 bowls for the wiring party and a third for the corporal who keeps pretending not to approve. He eats, wipes the rim with bread, and calls it fieldcraft, which is his way of saying he's grateful without breaking rank. You wash the helmet with boiling water until steam makes a veil of the dugout. The strap sleeps on its peg far from the pan, so commuters suffer. The terrier gets his rib and retires under the bench like an old gentleman who tipped everyone properly. You lie down with boots loosened and hands that smell of iron and onion. The trench listens to itself breathe. You decide to teach another man the ledger tomorrow because this job is only yours until you leave or sleep wins for good. Afternoon finds you with time small enough to measure, so you clean what keeps you steady. The brazier gets its holes scraped. The board learns a new angle. The helmet warms upside down to drive out damp like a kettle remembering manners. You polish the rim with sand until the dull shine answers a thumb. Strap off, liner out, both boiled and hung where stars can't gossip to glass. The knife drinks a film of oil and the stone walks its quiet circle until edge turns honest. You count the fat jar's scratches like tick marks on a gatepost and add 1 more for the spoon you'll spend tonight. Bowls simmer in a mess tin because heat that kills arguments also kills eggs. You bait 2 traps with biscuit dust, set the bells to whisper, and check the wind with the back of your hand. The trench smells of wet gun oil and onion memory. Quiet holds, not kindly but effectively, and you lean into it the way a tired man leans into a door he trusts. The working party detours by a smashed farmhouse that still believes it is a room. You step through flour and glass that learn to sparkle the hard way, lift a cupboard door, and meet a skillet with half a handle. You test its weight and feel your wrist vote no. The helmet rides easier, answers heat truer, and knows your balance better than any stranger pan could. In the scullery, a small jar hides behind stone. Rosemary, long dried, still honest. You tap a pinch into your palm and the smell wakes a sink, a towel, a window that once opened to hens. You pocket 2 needles of green like contraband kindness, leave coins you can spare on a ledge that will never notice, and walk back by hedges that can't remember summer. When the wire shows again, you carry homes that will never write you up. Rain returns thin but persistent, the sort that writes its own letter and then reads it back to be sure. You tilt a tarp to protect the flame, fit the mesh, and lay meat high so fat can find its way home. A dust of curry warms the oil without bragging. The sergeant takes his share, eats standing, and asks what you call this dish when you have to call it something. You say supper. He nods, and the word earns its pay. You split the browned end with the runner who forgot he was hungry, and he thanks you with a breath that no longer rattles. Drops drum on the tarp, steam answers with a steady hand. You taste the rim with bread, and wipe it clean so tomorrow doesn't inherit today's mistakes. You begin the handover you swore you would. The lad who watches best gets the stone and the rule about circles so small they look like patience. You show seam nick, peel, feet and tail to the sump, bile hole, liver out, rinse with boiled tea, salt late, pepper later, strap boiled alone, bowl scalded, spoons simmered, shares by memory, not by argument. He repeats each piece back like a catechism that feeds people. You let him run the pan while you mind the screen and wend, ready to catch a mistake before it calls itself policy. He turns the strips only once and you don't need to say good. You scratch a tiny ledger line on the fat jar and make him do the same, because memory fails before appetite. The rooster badge watches from its peg like a foolish saint, and the lad grins despite himself. Parcel day brings something you never asked for and needed anyway. A narrow apron, white once, trimmed with a line of blue that could have been Sunday. Your mother's note says only, for mess work, not church. You cut the waist into ties for the mesh stand and stitch the hem into a pad that fits the helmet's ear so fingers can lift without learning blisters again. A square becomes a towel you will never make clean, and the rest you fold and tuck for luck near the fat jar. For a minute you see her hand showing you how to wring cloth without wringing your wrists. You tie the rooster badge to the peg with a strip from the waistband, and the silliness steadies everyone. Even the terrier approves with a single thump. Night lets you write. You flatten a page on a lid, dip the pencil, and walk the day into sentences that won't frighten a kitchen. You mention the rosemary, the apron, a dog promoted for services to traps, and a sky that kept its temper. You do not mention tails traded for pennies or helmets that fry better than laws allow. You ask for pepper if it can be spared, and buttons if the drawer still has some that remember thread. You tell them you're eating, which is true, and you're tired, which is also true in a way that will not make anyone weep. You fold the paper, warm the stamp with breath, and set it under your shirt where ink believes in ribs. The brazier lowers its voice. The trench does too. Morning finds the brazier sulking and the rooster badge looking braver than anyone deserves. You wake the coals with patient breath, set the helm to warm, and let the strap steam on its lonely peg. The lad you chose for handover appears with a face that would like orders more than opinions. You give him work that steadies hands. Scrape paint scabs from the bowl, sand to a dull shine, wipe with a rag that remembers soap. Then the creed, slow enough to memorize. Seam nick, peel, feet off, tail off, gut hole, liver bind, rinse with boiled tea, salt late, pepper later. He repeats, stumbles on liver, tries again, and earns a nod. You lay onion at the rim, and the pan makes the sound that means the day will listen. He turns strips once, only once, and watches edges talk from pale to shore. Bowls line like quiet questions. You portion sick first, century next, then cue. When the last spoon scrapes, he wipes the rim with bread the way you do. He looks surprised when it works. Everyone is. Across the traverse, a poilu leans in with a smile like an old tool that always fits. He brings 2 cloves of garlic wrapped in a newspaper snippet about a play none of you will see. You trade off an onion and a promise of fair heat. Together you try a proper civet that doesn't know it isn't rabbit. Garlic thin at the rim, fat steady, meat browned, then coaxed with tea until the glaze slicks everything foolish. He adds a bay leaf that lived in a pocket with tobacco. You add a pinch from the curry tin and apologise to nobody. The trench smells like doors that open easily. Men eat behind screens like gentlemen hiding tears at a wedding. The poilu taps the rooster badge, calls you cousin, and pockets a thumb guard cut from dried skin with real thanks. When he returns to his bay, he walks taller by an inch. A flare lifts, falls, and both sides remember the wire. You bank coals and nod as if you shared a secret no shell can read. Shock doesn't always shout. A lad returns from a wiring crawl with quiet eyes and hands that can't set themselves down. He sits, boots on boards, breathing like a man learning how again. The orderly says hot, calm, and not much talking. You lean the helmet over a whisper, drop bones, then onion, then water that believes in boiling. The broth behaves the way kindness should. Plain, steady, there. You bring the bowl to his hands, not his face, because motion spooks grief. He looks at you, returns, and takes a careful sip. The steam writes a soft script across his lashes. You speak names that are chores: spoon, sip, swallow, breathe, and each one lands somewhere a little nearer. When he is ready, you add a small strip on crust, crisp enough to prove the day still does cause and effect. He chews. Colour comes back like a clerk late for work. Not heroic, dependable. The orderly nods. You clean the knife, and the brazier keeps its red coin like a heartbeat. Nobody claps. The lesson holds. The apron from home becomes more than a tidy joke. You cut pads from its hem so the lad can grip the bowl without earning his blisters a pension. The waist ties into a strap for the mesh stand. The clean square stays clean as long as war allows, which is to say, an hour. You stitch the rooster badge through a corner with a bit of blue thread that smells faintly of drawers. The terrier gets a patch for a torn ear, sewn fast while he pretends to resent mercy. Spoon handles gain scratches that stand for initials, and the rule you keep for shares: sick, century, then Q. You teach the lad to carve a tiny notch in the jar glass for each spoon spent, because memory is brave right up until it isn't. When you show him the place under the plank where skins dry and bones rest, he nods at the thrift like he's seen his own future. Perhaps he has. The trench respects tools that learn names. Storms have a way of grading your carpentry. Afternoon brings a wind that hammers the tarp, slants rain into the bay, and asks whether your screens are theatre or engineering. The lean-to answers with a sulk, a board lifts, a lip of the parapet slumps into the fire step like an old man's shrug. You cap the brazier, kick the coals to their shallow scrape, and turn the helmet into a shovel that doesn't mind work. Men haul, prop, and swear in a register that would shock church pews. A sapper bangs stakes as if nailing the sky down. You scoop, dump, and scoop again until the bay stands straight enough to pass for intentional. The terrier barks at thunder and then barks at you for finishing before he did. When the wind decides to argue elsewhere, you rebuild the stand, dry the bowl with the apron pad, and let a thin fire remember its craft. Onion returns, then strips, then a silence that tastes like relief spread thin. Steam finds shape. Everyone breathes. Evening belongs to ledgers and a little decency. You walk the trench with a lad pointing at corners that hide air, cracks that drink water, and nails that want persuasion. You hand him the stone and make him find the small circle on his own. He does. You make him say the creed without help, and he gets all the parts right, even bile hole and liver bind. You write 2 names on your cuff, one for a man who needs watching, one for a spoon owed tomorrow. You set a trap by the sump, baited with a paste that cost you crumbs, and show him how bells whisper without telling glass. Then you stand aside and let him run the pan for the last bowl of the day. He salts late, wipes the rim with bread, and hands you a strip like a man returning a favour he understands. You eat it, grin, and tell him he will hate onions forever, then ask for more onions tomorrow. He laughs once and believes you both. Orders for a push crawl along the bay like weather, nothing dramatic, just lists that lengthen, maps that pretend to be helpful, and a new tone in voices that liked yesterday better. You're told to prepare carry food, and you hear pockets that forgive panic. Pasties become policy. You mince meat with the small patience of someone who knows fingers remember before heads do. Onion softens, flour binds, fat behaves, and the dough accepts your thumbs without sulking. The helmet plays oven again over the mesh, 2 tins nested under like a small cathedral. You crimp edges, mark 1 slash for plain, 2 for pepper, 3 for the curry tin you now ration by nail marks. Lids on, rotate, listen for the note that says bottoms browned. When they knock hollow, you wrap each in paper cut from leaflets that promised soup and deliver only wicks. Men slip the pasties inside tunics like letters that will answer later. You keep 1 for stretcher men, 1 for the runner, and 1 for the man who writes names on crosses better than anyone should have to write them. Night before is always longer than the calendar allows. You clean what you can command, strap boiled, bowl boiled, spoons simmered, knives oiled until they shine like sensible stars. You check the mesh, tighten the nails, and fit a screen where glow might gossip. You stitch 1 last thumb guard and tuck it into the lad's pocket without speeches. A letter home lies under your shirt. You flatten it on a crate and write a page that will not frighten a kitchen. You mention the apron, the herbs, a dog with opinions, and a sky that mostly behaved. You ask for buttons, if there are any left that remember thread. You do not say tomorrow. You sign with a steady hand and warm the stamp with your breath until it decides to stick. Then you turn to the pan and make a small supper for the men who will sleep shallow and the men who won't sleep at all. Steam writes mercy where words would only scratch. The barrage begins at a decent hour for monsters. The ground learns to balance on noise. The sky lies about horizons. Everything redrafts grammar. You set the brazier in a hole as if it were a candle in a church, screen it twice, and keep water boiling because there will be need. The first stretchers arrive as if dragged by a tide nobody ordered. You cut tunic, not pride. You bind where the orderly points. You spoon broth to mouths that can do nothing clever. You keep your voice where hands can find it. Gas drifts low and mean. The rattle claws the air. You seat the mask and keep ladling because courtesy still counts under rubber. The helmet speaks through steam. The bowl passes hand to hand like a law everyone wants to keep. A shell coughs a little too near. Your ear forgets itself for a minute. The lad takes the pan without asking and runs it with the calm that used to be yours alone. You breathe. The world continues, which is ungenerous and exactly right. Hours stretch thin and then snap back. The lad works the creed while you steady the edges. Screen, wind, strap, stone, spoons simmered. Small things that quiet crowds. You see him salt late without being told, wipe the rim with bread, and hand the first bowl to the man on the worst knee like he was born in a kitchen that knew rules. You portion the pasties to hands that shake less after 3 bites. You tuck one under a blanket for a man who went silent because words forgot to fit. A poilu staggers in with a grin that mocks luck and a hand on a friend's shoulder. You slot bowls into both sets of fingers and hear merci land like a coin you won't spend. When you take the pan back, the lad gives you a look that says the baton has been moving whether or not you noticed. You nod and move aside. Work continues. It should. After seesaw comes inventory. Names first, then sots, then matches, because priorities only look strange to people who don't live here. You walk to the corner where tails become pennies and pour a small pile into the quartermaster's sack without asking for praise. He doesn't offer any. He notes the number and says your bay has fewer fevers this month. The orderly hears, eyes rimmed red, and writes broth at stand to, strap boiled daily in a margin that already carries 5 smudged lives. You rinse the helmet with a scald that would make glass flinch, scrub the rim with bread, and boil the strap 2 full minutes because rules comfort, even when prayers don't. The terrier climbs into your lap uninvited, decides he outranks sorrow, and sleeps. You let him, because tonight rank can be democratic. Rotation whisper returns like a rumour trying to be kind. You pack without pretending it is permanent. Knife wrapped, stone in the sock heel, jar wrapped twice, rooster badge tied to its foolish peg, apron folded around the dent like a mother's hand. The lad stands square in the dugout doorway, learning the look of a corner he will own. You make him say the creed one more time, then make him say the rule you never wrote. First bite goes to the man with the worst night. He sees it without blinking. You pass him the mesh, the strap's lonely peg, and the ledger that lives between ribs and spoon handles. He takes them like a man saluting something he actually believes. You shoulder your kit. The terrier looks torn, then decides to stay where bacon probability lives. Fair. You touch his ear and tell him to keep the bay in order. He thumps once. The helmet rides at the top of the sack like a crown that learned humility and then learned a second job. Road back tastes of iron and bread you cannot quite name. You ride a lorry that believes in its own noises and watch fields try at green like men trying at jokes. Barns become a billets again, and the pump you remember discovers generosity. You hang the helmet high and rinse it twice for the joy of boiling water that doesn't need guarding. A cook behind a window taller than any parapet asks if you know your way around a range. You nod. He points at onions that still crunch and a sack of flour that doesn't lie. You work without thinking and the room forgives the day. Men eat in lines that don't demand silence. A boy who hasn't seen the line yet asks what you used to cook in a helmet. You tell him supper and leave the rest for sleep to translate. At lights out, you lay the dented bowl on its side like a tired animal, and for the first time in months you do not hang the straps separate. Habit protests, then it rests. Night in billets is not quiet. It is generous. Boots thump rafters. Someone dreams in a voice too loud, and a harmonica loses its way twice before finding a tune worth forgiving. You lie on straw that smells of horses and old rain and let your shoulders sink until boards stop arguing. Fingers itch out of habit and only a little honesty. You think about the ledger you left where it belongs, between ribs and spoon handles, and about the lad who will add lines in a hand steadier than yours. You think of a terrier with a patched ear, a rooster badge that made sense of nothing and everything, and a bay that learned heat is medicine without calling it doctrine. You breathe in for 4, out for 6, like the orderly taught the fever lad, and the trick works on you too. Sleep finds you the way steam does, quiet, warm, necessary. Morning brings a small kindness you did not earn. A market square where women argue with cabbages and a baker throws hot rolls like a priest flinging blessings. You take your helmet to the estaminet out of habit, and the woman behind the stove luffs herself back to a version of the world that could afford amusement. She sets it on her hob with a kiss blown at the dent and fries eggs that swagger. You toast bread soldiers in your own ridiculous crown and pretend the smell is not going to make you cry in public. She presses salt into your palm and tells you not to forget how to measure with fingers. You promise you won't. Outside, a boy in wooden shoes points at the upside-down crown and declares you king of breakfast. You bow and decide this is a title you can survive. The road to the line is still there. So is the road back. You write one more letter while the ink behaves. Hey again, you begin, out of sheer habit, then catch yourself and choose dear all. Because you want the right people to overhear. You report that the helmet still holds heat and that onions still remember their manners when asked kindly. You confess to learning French words for garlic and crisp, to trusting tea more than water, to boiling straps until laces looked righteous. You do not name the meat. You say the pan made medicine of fat and patience. You ask for pepper if pepper still exists, and for buttons with holes that agree to work. You include a recipe that does not admit where the protein came from, only when to salt and when to listen. You close with a gentler promise than the line allows, that when you come through the door you will cook in a pan that was born for it, and you will still wipe the rim with bread, because the rule is good at any address. When your unit turns again toward the boards, you carry less than you once did, and more than you can say. The helmet rides at the top of the sack, dent forward like a compass. The strap, out of old loyalty, sleeps one peg away from anything that burns. The lad meets you at the fire step when you return, already talking in the grammar of heat and quiet. He shows you a ledger line you didn't write. Bay leaves. 2. Rosemary. Plenty. Pepper. Disciplined. And you grin in a way that hurts only a little. The terrier inspects your boots and decides you can be trusted again. You set the mesh, screen the glow, and let your hands find their places as if someone else taught them. When the pan hisses, the trench remembers which way is forward. You give the first bite to the man with the worst night as promised. The lad does the second without being told. The rule lives where it needs to live. And now, lay down. You're in a room that holds the day without arguing it. The helmet dries on its peg, rim-beaded, dent turned modest, strap hanging alone just because good habits deserve sleep too. Your hands smell of onion, iron, and a dozen mercies that never made it into orders. The ledger closes itself for tonight. Somewhere a dog sighs and a stove remembers a market. Somewhere else a trench waits under a sky that keeps secrets and gives them back one bowl at a time. You breathe like someone who has learned to count heat instead of fear. In for 4, out for 6, steady as spoons simmering. Tomorrow will ask for work. It always does. Tonight the pan is clean, the rules can rest. Close your eyes, let the smell fade to something gentler. Let your shoulders set like cooling steel. Sleep arrives the way steam does, quiet, warm and necessary, and you let it find you where you are.